Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Last voyage to the abyss. The sea stretched beyond the horizon, an endless expanse of water that shimmered under the heavy midday sun. I had always been drawn to the ocean, its vastness both terrifying and awe-inspiring. To some, a cruise ship represented a floating paradise. To me, it felt more like a gilded cage. The MSP Ocean Star, with its numerous decks and overstuffed common areas, was a marvel of engineering, but the moment I stepped aboard, an unsettling sense of unease settled in my stomach. I hesitated at the entrance, my hand clutching the ticket stub as if it were a lifeline. The air was thick with the smell of salt and sunscreen, mingling with the faint aroma of exhaust from the ship's engines. A gaggle of passengers bustled around me, laughing and taking selfies with their drinks in hand. I forced a smile, remembering the promise I made to my sister before she passed, to live a little, to take risks, even if that risk meant stepping out of my comfort zone. The ship creaked softly as it swayed to the rhythm of the waves, its hull splitting the water in a slow, relentless march toward the unknown. I knew the itinerary by heart: 3 days at sea, then a stop at a small island rumored to be a hidden gem. I had envisioned sunbathing on the deck, sipping cocktails, forgetting the world for a while. But as I wandered through the corridors filled with strangers, an ill-defined anxiety gnawed at me, like a distant thunderstorm threatening to break. I found my cabin on the third deck, a small space with a window overlooking the ocean. I tossed my suitcase onto the bed and pulled back the curtains, needing to see the waves crashing below. My reflection stared back at me, pale and tired, a ghost of the vibrant woman I used to be. As the ship set sail, I forced myself to explore. The dining hall buzzed with conversation, laughter spilling over like the wine in the glasses. I chose a small table in the corner, hoping for the anonymity of a stranger's company. As I ate my meal, the glint of silverware and the clinking of dishes created a strange cacophony that began to drown out the laughter. Midway through my pasta, the lights flickered, and a hush fell over the room. I glanced around, noting the unease on the servers' faces. Just as I thought it might have been a trick of the mind, the light stabilized, bathing the room in a warm glow once more. Dinner resumed, but something had shifted. I felt eyes on me, a prickle on the back of my neck that I couldn't shake. After dinner, I headed to the open deck, the salt air whipping through my hair. The ocean sparkled under the moonlight, a deceptive beauty masking its dangers. I leaned against the railing, inhaling deeply, when a sudden scream shattered the tranquility. It came from the direction of the casino, a sound so raw and primal that it sent chills down my spine. I rushed toward the sound, my heart pounding. A crowd was gathering outside the entrance of the casino. I pushed through, adrenaline lending me strength as I squeezed past bewildered onlookers. Inside, the scene was chaotic, tables overturned, chips scattered like fallen leaves, and a group of passengers clustered at the far side, their faces pale and eyes wide. A man lay on the floor, his body unnaturally still. I knelt beside him, my breath catching in my throat as I took in the sight. His shirt was stained with dark red, blood pooling beneath him. The world around me blurred, the laughter and chatter of the ship fading into a distant memory. Someone shouted for help, and a steward rushed in, while the crowd thickened, whispering in hushed tones. I felt the words wash over me, but only fragments registered: heart attack, foul play, who could do such a thing? I staggered back, pressing against the wall as panic gripped my chest. I had hoped for an escape from the looming darkness in my life, yet here it was, manifesting itself in a way I never expected. The grim realization that we were all trapped, suspended on this massive boat with a murderer among us, made me shudder. As the ship's crew cleared the area, I slipped out of the casino, desperate for fresh air. The deck was empty now, the stars twinkling faintly above, mocking my fear. I walked along the railing, peering into the abyss of the ocean, waves crashing energetically below. Was it really just a heart attack? Or was there something more sinister at play? I had hoped for a break from reality, but instead, reality had become a nightmare. I leaned against the railing, my thoughts racing. I was just one person among hundreds, and they were all strangers. Should I alert someone? Would they believe me? The thought of being trapped on this ship, surrounded by potential threats, made the air feel heavy. A sudden chill swept through me as I heard footsteps behind. I turned, my heart racing, but it was only a couple walking back from the bar, their laughter a stark contrast to the dread that lingered in my chest. I forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace, before turning my attention back to the endless sea, hoping to drown out my fears in the rhythmic crashing of waves. But deep down, I knew I would no longer be able to ignore the darkness that had found its way aboard the Ocean Star. The sound of the ocean was relentless, a rhythmic whisper that haunted the corridors of the Aurora. It felt as if the ship were alive, breathing a heavy sigh through its metallic ribs as it cut through the darkness of the open sea. I had always found comfort in the rolling waves, but there was an unsettling edge to this voyage that I could not shake. Waking up in my cabin the next day, the bright sunlight streaming through the window was a stark contrast to the sense of dread that clung to me. I had barely slept, my dreams tormented by fleeting images of shadowy figures lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I washed my face in the cramped bathroom, splashing cold water onto my skin, hoping to wash away the remnants of the night. I ventured onto the deck, in search of breakfast and perhaps a distraction. The dining area buzzed with laughter and conversation, a stark contrast to the turmoil that churned inside me. I picked at my food, trying to ignore the way the ship creaked and groaned. It was the sound of the sea, I told myself, the sound of a vessel that had weathered countless storms. After breakfast, I decided to explore the ship further. My feet led me down a narrow corridor that I hadn't noticed before, its polished wood glinting under the artificial lights. The air grew cooler as I walked, a chill that seemed to seep through the walls. I passed a series of closed doors, each one marked with a number and an ominous silence that sent a shiver down my spine. I paused at one door, the number 217 etched into a tarnished plate. A muffled sound, like someone softly crying, drifted through the crack beneath the door. Curiosity nudged me closer, but a sense of foreboding rooted me in place. It was none of my business. I stepped back, deciding that my imagination was simply running wild. Just as I turned to leave, a sudden crash echoed from the deck above, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. I ran up the stairs to find a crowd gathered near the railing, all of them peering into the frothing sea below. My heart raced as I pushed my way through to the front, where a crew member was trying to maintain order. "There's nothing to worry about." "Just a minor incident," he was shouting, his voice strained yet authoritative. I strained to catch a glimpse of what had drawn their attention, but all I could see were the dark waves, unyielding and mysterious. "What happened?" I asked a nearby passenger, anxiety tightening my stomach. "They said someone fell overboard," he replied, eyes wide as he scanned the water. "I think they're trying to find them." The word overboard echoed in my mind, heavy with implications. I stepped back from the throng, suddenly feeling as if the air was too thick to breathe. My gaze drifted to the railing, where a few crew members were now scanning the water below. I felt an insatiable urge to leave the crowd, to escape the sense of dread that was creeping over me once more. I retreated to my cabin, seeking solace in its familiarity. The door closed behind me with a soft click, muffling the chaos from the deck. I leaned against it, trying to calm the racing thoughts in my mind. Images of the crying I had heard earlier flooded my memory. It had been distant, yet it resonated with an ache that felt too intimate to forget. I paced the small room, my footsteps the only sound accompanying my spiraling thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong aboard the Aurora. Perhaps the incident was nothing more than a fluke, just a tragic accident, but the notion that someone had slipped away into the depths of the sea sent a chill through my bones. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal out here in the vastness of the ocean. My only tether to the outside world felt severed, leaving me adrift in a ship filled with strangers. I glanced at the clock. It was just afternoon. I needed to get out of my head. Determined to shake off the unease, I ventured back into the ship. As I walked the familiar corridors, I passed the same closed doors that had felt so ominous before. But this time, something was different. A series of whispers drifted through the air, barely audible yet unmistakable. I stopped, tilting my head to listen more closely, but the voices faded before I could decipher them. I continued on, drawn by the sounds that seemed to beckon me further into the heart of the ship. I ventured deeper, passing through areas that felt increasingly abandoned, the atmosphere heavier with each step. Watched by unseen eyes, I glanced over my shoulder, my pulse quickening. Then I saw a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway, a sliver of darkness that beckoned me closer. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a tempest. I approached with trepidation, my breath hitching in my throat as I reached for the handle. Before I could open it, I spotted a shadow flickering within. It danced just beyond my line of sight, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I hesitated, a gut instinct screaming for me to run. But the pull of curiosity was too strong. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. The room was empty, save for a single lamp casting a feeble glow against the far wall. But it was the mirror opposite me that caught my attention. There, reflected back at me, was not just my own wide-eyed face, but a fleeting shadow, dark and elongated, like a spectral warning. My heart raced, and before I could process what I had seen, the shadows flickered and disappeared. I stumbled back, the oppressive atmosphere choking me as I fled the room. I hurried down the corridor, my mind racing, desperate to escape the suffocating sense of dread. As I reached the deck, the sunlight felt blinding, but it was a welcome relief. I joined the other passengers, but the sense of safety was elusive. The whispers still echoed in my mind, taunting me as the reality of the ship crashed around me. I felt trapped, surrounded by a darkness that seemed to seep into every crevice of the Aurora. The ocean roared beneath us, alive with secrets, and I wondered if I would ever uncover the truth or if it would swallow me whole. The ocean's vastness enveloped the cruise ship like an unending shroud, its waves lapping against the hull in a rhythm that seemed almost hypnotic. I wandered the upper deck, my gaze tracing the horizon, where the sun began its slow descent into the indistinct line of the sea. The vibrant orange and pink hues contrasted sharply with the growing shadows that lurked in the corners of the ship, as if the fading light was a warning. After the unsettling encounter with the crew member who had warned me about the ship, unease settled in my stomach like a heavy stone. I had dismissed the man's words as the ramblings of a superstitious soul, yet I could not shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong about this voyage. The guests around me laughed and danced under the twinkling lights, their laughter mingling with the music that echoed across the deck. I tried to lose myself in their joy, but the mirth felt distant, like a hollow echo of a life I no longer belonged to. Earlier that morning, I had overheard a conversation that sent chills down my spine. Two women had been chatting about a series of disappearances that had plagued other cruise ships. It was easy to dismiss their fears as exaggeration, spun from tales of urban legends and horror stories. Yet, I felt compelled to find out more. As the sun dipped lower, I decided to explore the underbelly of the ship, a place I had avoided since boarding. I descended the staircase that led to the lower decks, the air growing stale and heavy with a faint smell of salt and machinery. The ambience shifted, a tangible tension lapping around me as I wandered through the eerily quiet corridors. Flickering lights cast sporadic shadows that danced along the walls, twisting the ship's familiar structure into something unsettling. I navigated past closed doors, each one a reminder of secrets I did not want to uncover. As I turned a corner, I stumbled upon a crew member standing by a service door, his back toward me. He was tall and built, his uniform crisp yet ill-fitting. I paused, contemplating whether to speak with him or retreat. The man suddenly turned, his expression unreadable, and I felt a jolt of recognition. It was the same man who had warned me about the ship. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. I took a step back, caught off guard. "No, I was curious about the lower decks." He scrutinized me for a moment, eyes narrowing as though he were weighing my sincerity. "Curiosity can be dangerous here. You should stay where it's safe. Don't wander too far." His warning felt more like a threat. I nodded hesitantly before turning to leave, my heart quickening. As I walked away, I glanced back to see him still watching, an unsettling aura surrounding him. I quickened my pace, the sound of my footsteps echoing against the cold metal walls. In my cabin, I tried to shake off the oppressive feeling that clung to me. The ship continued its steady hum, a mechanical heartbeat that resonated through the walls. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and groans of the vessel navigating the dark waters. Sleep eluded me, my mind racing with thoughts of the crew members' warning and the stories I had overheard. The night deepened, and shadows pulled in the corners of my cabin. I finally drifted off, only to be jolted awake by a violent shudder that reverberated throughout the ship. I sat up, heart pounding, and strained to listen. It wasn't just the usual sound of the ocean. A low growl echoed beneath me, almost like a beast awakening from slumber. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the cold air brushing against my skin. I knew I shouldn't investigate, but a force of compulsion pulled me toward the door, and I found myself stepping into the corridor once again. The atmosphere had shifted, a thick silence hung in the air, suffocating and heavy. With each step, I felt the temperature drop, a chill creeping up my spine. I moved stealthily, careful not to make a sound, but the further I walked, the more the air felt charged with dread. A deep growl echoed once more, sending shivers cascading down my arms. I pressed my back against the wall, the cold metal biting into my skin, as I scanned the dimly lit corridor. Then, I saw it, a shadow darting at the end of the hallway, too quick to be human. I squinted, straining to see, yet it vanished into an alcove. Against my better judgment, I followed, heart pounding erratically. I reached the alcove, and my breath caught in my throat. There, in the dim light, lay an open door that I could have sworn had been locked before. I crept closer, the growl intensifying, a guttural sound that reverberated through my bones. A flicker of movement caught my eye, and I peered into the darkness beyond the threshold. What I saw made my stomach twist in a way I had never experienced before. There were no lights inside, just darkness, swirling with an unnatural energy. The growling morphed into what sounded like whispers, an unintelligible language that scraped against my ears. Before I could process my fear, I heard a familiar voice, calling my name, low and taunting, threading through the shadows like a snake. I froze, dread pooling in my stomach, the realization hitting me like a tidal wave. The voice belonged to someone I recognized, someone who had vanished from my life long ago. I stumbled backward, the reality of what I faced crashing over me. The ship was no ordinary vessel. It was a predator, and I was its prey. It hunted for fear, for souls lost in the depths of despair. As I turned to run, the growling crescendoed, a promise of what lay behind me, and I knew then that there was no escaping the darkness that had enveloped the ship. I fled, footsteps echoing as I raced through the labyrinth of hallways, each twist and turn leading me deeper into the heart of the horror. The morning light filtered through the cabin's porthole, casting a watery glow on the walls. I had thought sleep would bring clarity, but instead, I awoke to the oppressive weight of the night's events. Memories of the stateroom's shadows danced on the edges of my mind, taunting me. I rubbed the residue of fatigue from my eyes and tried to shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong, but dread lingered like a fog. I was alone in my cabin. The rest of the ship had become a ghostly echo of its former self, the laughter and chatter of passengers replaced by an uneasy silence. A chill prickled at my spine. I had tried to convince myself it was just a ship in the middle of the ocean, but with each passing hour, that notion unraveled. Pulling myself out of bed, I slipped on a sweater to ward off the artificial cold of the air conditioning. I made my way to the door, hesitating only for a moment as I noticed my reflection in the small mirror mounted on the wall. The pale face staring back at me seemed foreign, eyes wide and shadowed. I took a deep breath, focused on the door's handle, and stepped out. The hallway felt disquietingly empty. I glanced left, then right, searching for any sign of life. Light flickered from down the corridor, a hint of warmth amidst the sterile whiteness of the ship's design. I walked towards it, drawn by an instinct that perhaps I was not as alone as I had feared. As I approached, I noticed it was coming from one of the larger common areas, the lounge. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room, usually bustling with passengers, was eerily frozen in time. Chairs were pushed back from tables, drinks abandoned mid-sip, and the massive windows that usually showcased the endless sea were now clouded as if smeared with grime. The faint scent of salt and something else, something sickly sweet, lingered in the air. "Hello?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the void. No response, just the distant thrum of the ship's engines, a monotonous pulse that echoed the unease in my chest. I walked further into the room, my footsteps muffled against the plush carpet. The bar was stocked, but the bottles were fogged over, and no drinks had been served in what felt like hours. I leaned against the counter, feeling the cool surface beneath my palm. It offered little comfort. A sudden noise broke the silence, a thump from somewhere across the room. My heart raced, and I swung around, my eyes darting to the shadows. "Is anyone there?" I called again, my voice trembling around the edges. With a shudder, I turned toward the source of the sound. It came from behind the large curtains that draped across the windows. I approached them cautiously, breath hitching in my throat. I pulled back the fabric, only to reveal nothing but empty chairs and tables. The silence resumed, deeper now, pressing against my ears. Then I heard it, a soft whisper. Not from my mind, but a haunting sound that crawled through the air, chilling me to the core. It seemed to come from below, somewhere beneath the floorboards. I crouched to place my ear against the ground, hoping to grasp some context. The whisper grew louder, a chorus of voices blending into an unintelligible hum. Still, I could not discern words, only a rising sense of urgency mixed with fear. A deep instinct told me to run, to get as far away from this cursed place as possible. But another part, a darker part of me, remained rooted to the spot, captivated by the mystery. Suddenly, the flooring creaked, a heavy footfall echoing from behind me. I spun around to find the room still empty. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backwards, my heel catching on the edge of a chair. I fell, hitting the floor hard, the wind knocked out of me. I lay there, dazed, and for a moment, the whisper stopped. Then it returned, more insistent, and I realized it was not merely a jumble of voices, it was a warning. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline igniting my senses. I had to find my friends, had to discover if they were safe, or if they too had fallen into the clutches of this ship. I rushed out of the lounge and back into the hallway. My heart hammered in my chest as I moved quickly, the walls closing in around me. I needed to find the deck, to breathe air that wasn't drenched in fear. I ran, ignoring the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. As I reached the staircase to the upper deck, I heard another sound of laughter. It rang out clearly and joyfully, stark against the backdrop of the ship's growing malevolence. It was familiar. I knew those voices. My stomach nodded, a mix of relief and dread, and I rushed up the steps. Bursting through the door onto the deck, the sun blazed overhead, yet the atmosphere felt wrong. The laughter faded abruptly as I stepped into view. My friends stood huddled together, but their faces were ashen, eyes wide. Something in their posture hinted at an unspoken agreement to remain silent about whatever horrors they had encountered. "Guys!" I called out, relief flooding my voice. But the laughter did not resume. They turned slowly, like marionettes whose strings had been cut. "We need to go," one of them, Sarah, finally said, her voice trembling. "Something's wrong with the ship." "What do you mean?" I asked, but deep down, I already knew. The air felt thick around us, swirling with unseen tendrils of dread. Before anyone could respond, a growl reverberated through the air, low and guttural. It shouldn't have belonged to anything human. The laughter faded into a chilling silence, and the horizon stretched out before us, an endless void that seemed to mock our presence. I felt the ship shudder beneath our feet, a violent tremor that sent us sprawling back against the railing. The ocean roared in response, waves crashing against the hull as if the sea itself sought to claim us. In that moment, I realized we were not simply trapped on a ship. We were prisoners of something far more sinister than the waves, something that had awoken from a long slumber, and it wasn't finished with us yet. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting hues of crimson and violet across the sky, I stood at the railing of the cruise ship, the SS Orion, feeling the salt air sting my face. The feeling of dread that had begun to settle in my stomach weeks earlier intensified with each passing moment. The laughter and voices of passengers around me faded into an unsettling hum, their carefree joy contrasting sharply with my increasing sense of foreboding. I could no longer ignore the strange occurrences that had plagued our journey since we left port. It started innocently enough, the odd creaking sounds echoing through the halls at night and the flickering lights that came and went without reason. But now, shadows seemed to linger in corners, watching, waiting. The ship felt alive, and I was certain it had teeth. I glanced at my watch. It was just after 9 p.m. The onboard activities had drawn the majority of passengers toward the dining halls or lounges, but I needed to escape the throngs. I needed to think. I turned from the railing and moved toward the dimly lit corridor that led to my cabin, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the ship's indifferent bulk. The first thing I noticed as I entered my cabin was the door slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside cautiously. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't quite place. I shook my head, dismissing it as paranoia, but my heart raced as I surveyed the room. Everything seemed in order, yet an inexplicable chill crept over me. I placed my hand on the table to steady myself, and that's when I noticed a slip of paper folded neatly in the center of my bed. Curiosity piqued, I picked it up, unfolding it slowly. The handwriting was erratic, the letters slanted and uneven. It read, "You must leave before midnight. He's coming for you." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I looked around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the room was empty. I crumpled the note in my fist, my hands trembling. Who was it warning me? And who was he? In a panic, I grabbed my phone to check for any messages or missed calls, but the screen remained stubbornly blank. No signal. No connection to the outside world. I felt a wave of claustrophobia wash over me, and I sprinted toward the door, throwing it open. I made my way back to the main deck, the stars overhead twinkling with a mocking indifference. The ship's atmosphere had shifted. The laughter and chatter had faded, and the path ahead seemed to narrow like a corridor of impending doom. With each step, the soft thrumming of the engines felt more like a heartbeat, pounding relentlessly with my own. As I turned a corner, I caught sight of a figure standing by one of the lifeboats. They wore a dark coat, the collar turned up against the night air, their face hidden in shadow. Anxiety gripped me, but I pressed on, determined to confront this apparition. Perhaps they had answers. Perhaps they were the one who sent the note. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice wavering. The figure turned slowly, and I was struck by the unsettling familiarity of their features. It was the ship's captain, a stern man with a sun-weathered face and a gaze that pierced through the darkness. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice deep and gravelly, laced with something I couldn't quite identify. There was an authority in his tone that made me hesitate. I found a note in my cabin. It said that I needed to leave before midnight." "What does it mean?" My heartbeat pounded in my ears, drowning out the sounds of the ocean. The captain's expression hardened. "You shouldn't be here. The ship is not what it seems. You must find a way off." He nodded toward the lifeboat, his eyes darting nervously around as if expecting someone to appear. "What do you mean? What's happening?" I pressed, fear creeping in like a jagged thorn. "It's not safe. There are things aboard this vessel that even I cannot control. You must trust me. Go!" Before I could respond, he turned abruptly, his silhouette swallowed by the darkness, leaving me alone once more. I felt a mix of confusion and fear. Was he warning me or leading me into a trap? Panic surged through me, and I made my way to the lifeboat. The lifeboat itself loomed large, a promise of escape. My hand shook as I fumbled with the release mechanism. As I worked, the ship shuddered beneath my feet, and the lights flickered again, plunging the deck into momentary darkness. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting the captain to return. Instead, I saw the shadows elongating, twisting, and contorting unnaturally. My breath caught in my throat as a figure emerged from the dark, a man clad in a tattered uniform, his face obscured by the brim of a worn cap. "Leave the boat alone," he rasped, his voice a hollow whisper. "You cannot escape." I froze, the realization hitting me like a blow. He wasn't just a crew member, he was one of the lost souls that haunted this vessel. The note, the captain's warning, it all clicked together. Panic flooded through me, and I turned and ran, the echoes of tapping footsteps chasing me down the corridor as I sprinted toward the nearest exit. I couldn't let the darkness consume me, not tonight. I needed to survive, to find the others, to make sense of the madness before the clock struck midnight. The night deepened around the ship like a shroud, the air thick with an unsettling tension. I found myself on the upper deck, the salt spray mingling with the chill that crept into my bones. The ocean stretched infinitely beyond, a dark mirror reflecting a sky littered with stars, but instead of serenity, I felt an oppressive weight pressing down on me. It had been 2 days since we'd lost contact with the mainland, and whispers of unease twisted through the passengers like freight threads unraveling a fabric. I had retreated to the deck after dinner, seeking solace from the jittery conversations and nervous laughter that had turned hollow among my fellow travelers. Until now, our cruise had been a simple escape, a chance to break away from the humdrum of life. But everything changed the moment the first scream echoed through the corridors, a piercing wail that shattered the calm. I glanced over the edge of the railing, the ocean roiled beneath the ship, deep and impenetrable. I could still hear the faint reverberations of the scream, a visceral reminder of the fear that now permeated the air. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I nearly jumped. It was Sarah, her face pale, eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling, though she tried to steady it. I nodded, swallowing hard. The memory of that first scream lingered, a specter that haunted both of us now. "They say someone went missing," she continued, glancing around as if the shadows might leap forward and snatch her away. What if it was more than just a drunken accident? I took a deep breath, attempting to shake off the encroaching dread that wrapped around me like a noose. "We should find the others," I suggested, though the thought of heading back inside the ship sent a shiver down my spine. The interior had grown suffocating, each hallway thick with an unspoken terror that made my skin crawl. As we turned to head back, the sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell. It was Charlie, his face ashen, eyes fixated on something just out of view. "You need to see this," he said, urgency coating his words. I exchanged a glance with Sarah, and despite the instinct to flee, curiosity pushed us forward. The three of us crept through the dimly lit passageways, the heavy air clinging to our skin. Every creak of the ship felt amplified, every shadow a potential threat. We reached the crew's quarters, where Charlie gestured toward an open door, revealing a darkened room. Inside, a single light flickered, casting trembling shadows on the walls. In the center of the room lay a deckhand, his body contorted as if caught in a violent struggle. A pool of blood seeped into the floor, dark and viscous, a stark contrast against the pale tiles. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt the bile rise as the reality of the situation slammed into me. "He's dead," I whispered, the words hollow and heavy. The sight of the lifeless form stripped away any illusion of safety I had clung to. "But how?" Sarah's voice cracked. "I thought they were safe." Charlie shook his head, his brows knit in confusion. "What if it's not over? What if they're still out there?" His tone hinted at a deeper fear that echoed my own thoughts. Before either of us could respond, a loud thud reverberated through the ship, and the lights flickered violently. Panic surged through me, and I instinctively grabbed Sarah's wrist, pulling her toward the exit. We rushed past the dead crew member, the sight searing into my mind, and back into the claustrophobic corridors. As we stumbled into the main atrium, the atmosphere shifted. Passengers milled about, their faces drawn and anxious. The laughter had died, replaced by frantic whispers and nervous shuffling. A man stood on a table, trying to restore order, but his voice was drowned out by the rising tide of fear. "Listen, everyone, please," he shouted. "We need to stay calm. There have been incidents, but we're safe here." His words felt inadequate, a flimsy shield against the encroaching dread that lurked just beyond the walls. But the crowd was restless, shifting and murmuring, and I could see the fear blooming in their eyes. I turned to Sarah and Charlie. "We need to get back to our cabin," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Together, we pushed through the throng, the unease coiling tighter with each step. Every shadow felt alive, watching us, waiting. I felt like prey, hunted by an unseen beast. As we reached our cabin, I fumbled with the keycard, the lock clicking open with a finality that sent chills down my spine. Inside, the room felt claustrophobic, the walls closing in. I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart racing. "What now?" Sarah asked, her eyes darting around the space, searching for an escape that didn't exist. "Now we wait," I said, though I could feel the panic rising in my throat. But even as I spoke, I knew we couldn't remain passive. We needed to understand what was happening, to find a way to fight back if it came to that. As the hours dragged on, we took turns keeping watch, the ship creaking and swaying outside our cocoon. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something lurked just beyond the door, something that knew we were trapped. The endless night wore on, filled with hushed whispers of panic and fear, each moment pregnant with dread. The ocean roared beneath us, a reminder of our isolation, a prison built on dreams of escape, now betrayed by something sinister lurking in its depths. The night air was thick with dread, a suffocating weight that clung to my skin like a shroud. I felt the ship, the MS Ardent Spirit, sway beneath me, a vessel caught between its journey and an unseen abyss. I had always thought of the ocean as a vast expanse of freedom, but now it felt like an endless void, hungry and merciless. After everything that had happened, I had begun to question my sanity. The cries echoed in my mind long after they had ceased, distant and plaintive. No one else on board had seemed to hear them. I recalled the moments between the screams, the chilling silence that followed, and the frantic whispering among the crew. They were hiding something. I was sure of it. As I wandered the deserted corridors of the ship, shadows danced along the walls, flickering under the dim emergency lights. The thick carpet muffled my steps, but that did little to quell the sense of being watched. I hugged my arms around myself, every instinct screaming at me to run back to my cabin and lock the door. But curiosity, that insatiable beast, urged me forward. I found myself at the bow, where the wind howled like a banshee. The ocean roared, every wave crashing against the hull like some monstrous creature intent on boarding. I leaned over the railing, searching the inky blackness for signs of life, but all that stared back were the churning depths. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently. I gripped the railing harder, heart racing, as the horizon twisted and turned. A figure appeared at the edge of my vision. I turned, startled, and saw a man standing beneath the dim light of a flickering bulb. His features were obscured in shadow, but I could make out the blank expression on his face. He seemed out of place, as though he had stepped out of another time. "Are you all right?" I called, my voice trembling in the gale. He didn't respond. Instead, he stepped closer, revealing a tattered uniform that barely clung to his gaunt frame. The stench of decay wafted toward me, and I felt bile rise in my throat. "You shouldn't be here," he finally muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why not?" I asked, instinctively taking a step back. He looked around, as if sensing something that I could not. "They're watching," he said, eyes darting nervously. "You need to leave. This ship, it's not just a ship." "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, a loud thud resonated through the ship, shaking the walls. Startled, we both turned toward the source of the noise. It seemed to come from below, deep within the bowels of the vessel. The man's face twisted in fear. "You have to go. Now." I hesitated, torn between fleeing and understanding. "What's down there?" He grasped my arm, his fingers cold and clammy. "Something that shouldn't be. The crew, they know the truth." Before I could respond, he released me and turned to run, disappearing into the shadows. I was left standing there, heart hammering in my chest as panic surged within me. I had to know what was happening. I had to find out what lay below. I hesitated only for a moment, then dashed down the dimly lit corridor leading toward the crew quarters. Each door I passed felt like a portal to another world, secrets hidden behind metal panels. The air grew cooler, and with each passing step, the atmosphere thickened with an unshakable dread. I arrived at the staircase that led down. The metal rail was icy under my grip, and I descended into the darkness below, the sound of my footsteps echoing ominously in the stillness. Each landing I reached felt like stepping deeper into the bowels of the ship, just as the man had warned. At the bottom, I found myself in a corridor lined with heavy doors. One was slightly ajar, its hinges groaning in protest. I pushed it open, revealing a small room filled with old equipment and what appeared to be a control panel flickering with lights. Papers were strewn about, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke. I scanned the room, fear prickling at the back of my neck. On the floor lay a body, slumped and lifeless, eyes wide and unseeing. My stomach churned. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over the remnants of a once proud ship's operations room. Then I heard it. A low, mournful wail reverberated through the walls, seeping into my bones. I froze, paralyzed with terror. The sound coiled around me, a living thing desperate to be heard. I couldn't rationalize it, could only feel it, a raw sorrow that begged for recognition. I turned to leave, heart pounding like a drum. But as I did, the lights flickered once more, and a shadow loomed at the doorway. It was the man from the bow, but now there was something different about him. His eyes were hollow, devoid of life, and a gaping wound stretched across his neck. "You shouldn't have come down here," he rasped, voice echoing with an unnatural tone. Before I could process what was happening, he lunged at me. I barely ducked in time, bolting past him into the corridor. My heart raced as I sprinted back toward the staircase, every instinct screaming for me to escape. The ship felt alive around me, the walls closing in, the howling wind outside morphing into a cacophony of anguished cries. Just as I reached the stairs, the lights flickered one last time, casting an eerie glow over the space. I turned, hoping to see the man, but he was gone. In his place stood a shadow, dark and formless, rising up from the depths. It stretched toward me, and I felt its cold breath on my skin. I sprinted up the stairs, the wooden steps creaking under the weight of my fear. I could hear whispers now, low and sinister, echoing around me. I had to get out, had to escape whatever lurked behind me. Bursting onto the main deck, I gasped for air, the cool night enveloping me like a bomb. But even in the open air, I could not shake the feeling of dread. The ship was alive, and it was hungry. The ocean churned beneath me, a reminder of the terror that lay just below the surface, waiting for the next unwitting soul to wander too far. I looked out over the rolling waves, unsure of what awaited me in this vast, unforgiving abyss. I was no longer just a passenger on a cruise. I was prey, caught in a nightmare that refused to end. The air inside the cruise ship felt thicker than the salty sea breeze outside, as if the walls themselves were closing in around me. I could hear the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses from the upper decks, but down here, in the bowels of the ship, it was an entirely different world. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the metal walls, heightening the unease that had gripped me since the first inexplicable incident. I hadn't spoken much about what I had seen. The girl standing by the railing, her eyes unnaturally wide, lips barely moving as she whispered to the waves below, yet I had felt the chill radiating from her, a coldness that made the hair on my arms stand on end. After that moment, I had made my way back to my cabin, desperately trying to convince myself it had been a trick of the light, or perhaps a figment of an overactive imagination. But when I awoke in the middle of the night, the sound of water slapping against the hull transformed into whispers, soft and beckoning. That night, sleep eluded me. Instead, I had wandered the ship, my feet taking me where my mind feared to tread. The hallways stretched on endlessly, and the damp smell of mildew hung in the air. I was convinced I could hear someone else moving about, a soft shuffle that echoed in the distance. I pressed my ear against a door, heart pounding, but all that greeted me was silence and the low hum of machinery. By the time dawn broke over the horizon, I had lost track of how long I had been awake. The ship felt like a labyrinth, twisting and turning with hidden corners and dark alcoves. I returned to my cabin, half expecting something to greet me, but the room was still. I stepped inside and locked the door. It felt like a fragile barrier against whatever shadow lurked beyond. My mind was racing when I finally decided to seek out my friend, Claire. She had been on the cruise with me, a much-needed escape from the stresses of everyday life. But the cheerful demeanor I had known was replaced with a haunted look, her eyes sunken, as if she had not slept in days. "Did you hear her?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "The girl at the railing?" I nodded, feeling a chill creep down my spine. I had hoped I was not the only one affected, that perhaps sharing our experiences would tether us to reality. "We need to find her," Claire said, determination creeping back into her voice. "We need to understand what's happening." We set off together, navigating the winding halls with a cautious gait. Every creak of the ship's structure reminded us how vulnerable we were, trapped in this floating metal behemoth surrounded by an endless expanse of water. As we descended deeper into the ship, the atmosphere shifted, thickening with the weight of something unspoken. The soft hum of the engines faded, replaced by a distant throbbing that pulsed through the air. We found ourselves at a service entrance, dimly lit, that led to the crew quarters. Claire pushed the door open, and a rush of cold air spilled out, carrying the scent of stale cigarettes and something else, something rotten. "Do you think they know?" I asked, my heart hammering as I glanced around the cramped room filled with hastily stacked equipment and old uniforms. "Maybe," Claire replied, her eyes darting toward the far end of the room where shadows clung. "But they wouldn't tell us. They never do." Then we heard it, a faint giggle that sent a shiver crawling down my spine. It was childlike, innocent, yet somehow wrong in this place. "We should go," I whispered, pulling at Claire's arm. But she was already moving toward the source of the sound, drawn in like a moth to a flame. As we crept deeper into the crew quarters, the laughter escalated, morphing into a cacophony of voices that swirled around us, wrapping us in a surreal embrace. The walls began to close in, seemingly alive, pulsating with the rhythm of our fear. Claire suddenly stopped, her face pale as she pointed at something on the wall. "That's her," she breathed. I followed her gaze, and there, scrawled in dark red letters, was a name, Lila. Below it, a crude drawing of a girl smiling, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. The laughter returned, louder now, echoing off the walls as if they were alive and mocking us. "No, we need to leave," I urged, but Claire had already taken a step closer. The atmosphere charged with static, a sense of impending doom rolling like thunder in the distance. I could feel a pulse beneath my feet, a rhythm that seemed to sync with our racing hearts. "Lila," Claire called out, her voice filled with both fear and desperation. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so profound it felt suffocating. I grabbed her wrist, tucking her back towards the exit, but then the air changed. It was heavy with sorrow, the weight of untold stories pressing down on us. The shadows seemed to shift, gathering at the far end of the room, and suddenly a figure emerged. Lila. Hair wild and eyes clouded like the depths of the ocean. She stared at us, expression unreadable, and for a moment, a sensation of profound sadness washed over me, as if I stood on the edge of a great abyss. "Help me," she mouthed soundlessly, a plea beyond time and space. Before I could respond, the ship lurched violently, tossing us against the wall. I heard Claire scream, felt her hand slip from mine as I was thrown into darkness. I scrambled to my feet, disoriented, the echo of Lila's voice lingering in the air long after she vanished. I didn't know what had happened to Claire, but I couldn't linger. The walls were coming alive, breathing, and I felt the weight of every soul the ship had ever carried pressing down on me. As I ran towards the exit, the laughter returned, a frenzied chorus echoing behind me, urging me to turn back. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I burst through the door and into the corridor, gasping for air, darkness swirling at the edges of my vision. The ship was alive, and it demanded its price. The dim light of the corridor flickered, casting elongated shadows that danced across the walls as I made my way toward the aft of the ship. The echoes of muffled laughter and clinking glasses faded into the background, replaced by an unsettling stillness that seemed to wrap around me like a shroud. I had thought the party at the upper deck would provide some distraction, but the atmosphere had turned thick and oppressive, each shred of joy suffocated by an unseen weight. I remembered the warnings from the crew, whispered in tense tones about strange occurrences that had been plaguing the ship since we set sail. Passengers had gone missing, and some returned with stories that twisted my stomach into knots. My own experience with the lurking dread was fresh. I could still feel the ghostly touch of the unknown lingering on my skin. As I reached the hallway leading to the observation deck, a sudden chill enveloped me. I paused, glancing over my shoulder. The corridor behind me remained empty, but the silence felt alive, as though something was watching. I turned back, trembling as I gripped the railing, peering into the crisp night outside. The ocean stretched out endlessly, a vast, dark entity that threatened to swallow the ship whole. A soft sound caught my attention. I steadied my breath, straining to listen. It was a low, almost melodic humming, drifting down the hallway like an ethereal whisper. I felt an involuntary tug toward it, a desperate curiosity mingling with fear. I took a few hesitant steps, the humming growing louder, more insistent, as if beckoning me forward. I followed the sound, each footfall sounding like a drumbeat in the silence. It led me to a door slightly ajar at the end of the corridor. The door bore no number, which only heightened my unease. I hesitated, the instinct to turn back battling with the need to discover the truth behind the eerie lullaby. Pushing the door open, I stepped into a small room dimly lit by a single overhead bulb. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with dusty trinkets and forgotten objects that felt out of place on a cruise ship. A heavy, musty scent hung in the air. In the center of the room stood a young woman, her back turned to me, swaying gently as she sang. I felt my heart quicken, the hairs on the back of my neck rising. "Excuse me," I called hesitantly, unsure if I should interrupt. She turned, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes were wide and glassy, as if she had just awoken from a deep sleep. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "They don't like it when we interrupt." "Who?" I asked, feeling the fear coiling tighter around my chest. She didn't answer. Instead, she resumed her haunting melody, her body moving rhythmically as if compelled by strings unseen. I felt a pull toward her, an inexplicable need to get closer, to understand. But just as I took a step forward, the humming shifted, morphing into a low, guttural growl that made my blood run cold. "Leave now," the woman snapped, her gaze piercing through me. "They're coming." I stumbled back, the door creaking ominously behind me. I turned to flee, but the hallway was no longer empty. Shadows shifted and twisted into grotesque forms, their outlines sharp against the dim light. Panic surged through me, and I bolted down the corridor, the sounds of my own footsteps echoing like a frantic heartbeat. As I sprinted, a voice followed me, a distorted amalgamation of laughter and sorrow. "You can't escape. You're part of the ship now." The words sent a jolt of terror through me, and I skidded to a halt, darting into a nearby restroom, slamming the door. I pressed my back against it, gasping for breath, my mind racing. The humming persisted outside, growing louder, a chorus of voices merging into an unholy symphony. The bathroom was cramped, the fluorescent light flickering ominously, illuminating the cracked tiles and grimy mirrors. I caught my reflection, wild-eyed and pale, and felt a surge of desperation. I couldn't die here. I had to figure out what was happening. Steeling myself, I stepped away from the door and reached for the window. I peered through the glass, hoping to catch a glimpse of the ocean, a tether to reality. Instead, I saw nothing but darkness. It was as if the ship was suspended in some ethereal void, disconnected from the world. A loud bang resonated against the door, making me jump. "You can't hide," a voice shrieked, echoing through the metal. It was a cacophony of despair, a chorus of the damned. I knew I had to escape. I rounded the sink and opened the door just a crack, peering into the corridor. The shadows had receded, but I could still hear the distant humming, a siren call promising safety yet oozing with malevolence. I hesitated, weighing my options. I could stay and risk whatever was out there, or I could move forward, into the unknown. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped out into the hallway, adrenaline surging through my veins. The ship creaked and groaned, a living entity manifesting my fears. I moved quickly, keeping my movements silent, listening for any signs of life. But the silence was deafening, broken only by that wretched humming which seemed to wrap around me, drawing me deeper into its embrace. Just as I approached the stairs leading to the main deck, the humming intensified. I turned to see a figure standing at the end of the corridor, shrouded in shadow. It was the woman from the room, her eyes glowing with a strange light. "Come back," she cried out, her voice laced with urgency. "It's not what you think." But the shadows were converging, swirling around her, pulling her into their depths. I turned and ran, sprinting up the stairs, desperate to escape the nightmare that had become my reality. As I emerged onto the main deck, the night air hit me like a wave, sharp and cutting. But the terror was far from over, as I felt the ship shudder beneath me. The ocean roared in anger below, and I knew that something wicked was waiting just beneath the surface, hungry for our souls. The cabin felt smaller than it had before, the walls closing in like the maw of some great beast. My mind raced with the reality that enveloped me, the ship's gentle rocking now a sinister lullaby. I peered out through the porthole, the vastness of the ocean stretching toward an oblivion that matched my growing dread. It was just past midnight. The moon's silver glow cast eerie shadows in the dim light of my room, heightening the unsettling feeling that had settled in my gut. Earlier that evening, I had overheard snippets of hushed conversations on the deck. Whispers threaded through the air, speaking of a passenger, a woman who had disappeared without a trace just 2 days into our voyage. The staff brushed it off with rehearsed calm, claiming she had likely disembarked at one of the stops, but the tightness in their voices betrayed them. I knew better. Something was wrong aboard this vessel, and it gnawed at me like a rat in the dark. I had spent the day trying to shake off the unease. I joined others on excursions, basked in the sun, feigned laughter in the crowded lounges, but every laugh echoed hollow in my chest. The ship felt alive in a way that was unsettling, as if it had transformed from a vessel of luxury into a floating prison. As the hour grew late, I found myself succumbing to curiosity. The corridor outside my cabin, typically adorned with gaudy paintings and flickering lights, felt like a labyrinth. Each door looked the same, yet each was a doorway to unknown horrors. I crept toward the common area where the crew often gathered, hoping to find answers. The lights within were dimmed, shadows cast by the flickering overheads dancing along the wooden floor. I hesitated outside the door, hearing muffled voices. I leaned in, straining to catch fragments. Found her belongings. No sign of her. Must be reported. Anxiety prickled my skin. Just then, the door swung open, and I stumbled backward, nearly colliding with a startled crew member. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his face a mask of feigned concern. I nodded, though my voice trembled as I asked, "What happened to the woman? The one who went missing?" His expression shifted, tension rippling through his posture. "Nothing to worry about. Just a misunderstanding. She probably went to explore." He stepped back, his eyes darting away, avoiding mine as if I were an unwelcome truth he could not face. "Doesn't anyone find that strange?" I pressed, emboldened by a mix of fear and anger. "Strange things happen at sea," he muttered, his tone dismissive. "Just forget it, all right?" But I couldn't forget. Each passing moment felt heavier than the last, the weight of my instincts urging me to uncover the truth. I turned back toward my cabin, navigating the dimly lit corridors. Suddenly, a scream shattered the silence, piercing through the night like a knife. It came from below. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I sprinted toward the source, heart pounding in my ears. The noise echoed in my mind, raw, desperate. I reached the stairs leading down to the lower decks and hesitated. This part of the ship was rarely traversed by passengers. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but the sound echoed once more, drawing me down. The air grew cooler as I descended, the lights flickering sporadically. I could barely make out the faded numbers on the doors lining the hallway. My breath came in short gasps as I ventured deeper into the bowels of the ship. Each step echoed like a warning. Another scream erupted, more frantic this time. It was then that I noticed a shadow flicker at the end of the corridor. I hurried forward, the floor creaking beneath my feet. As I approached, I was met with a door slightly ajar. The dim light seeped through the crack, illuminating the room beyond. I pushed the door open, the creak sending a shiver down my spine. The room was empty, save for a few scattered belongings that bore the woman's name. Her purse lay abandoned on the floor, open and spilling its contents: lipstick, a mirror, and a photograph. I picked it up, recognizing her face from the brochures scattered around the ship. She was smiling, blissfully unaware of the fate that awaited her. That realization sent a chill down my spine. I turned to leave but froze as the door slammed shut behind me. Panic surged, and I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence answered back, mocking my fear. The air grew thick, and I could sense the presence of something else in the room, something lurking just beyond my line of sight. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned, heart pounding, and saw a figure standing in the corner, shrouded in shadows. The shape shifted, and I fought the urge to scream. "Help!" I shouted, pounding on the door, desperate for rescue, but no one came. The shadows closed in around me, suffocating and heavy. I could feel eyes watching, an unseen audience quietly relishing my terror. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a face twisted in grief and rage. It was her, the woman from the photograph. Her eyes, once bright with life, now glowed with an otherworldly light, filled with sorrow and anger. I stumbled back as she raised a finger, pointing at me, a silent accusation that chilled my blood. The lights flickered violently, and I could hear the ship groaning in protest. In that moment, I realized the truth. I was not just a passenger aboard this vessel. I was part of something much darker. The ship was hungry, and it would not rest until it had claimed its due. The air inside the ship felt heavier that night, as if the ocean itself pressed against the hull, desperate to reclaim whatever life was aboard. I had wanted to escape the shadows of my cabin, but stepping into the public areas felt like wandering into a funeral parlor. The dim lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that darted nervously along the walls. I shivered as I recalled the events of the past few days, the whispers, the disappearing passengers, and the feeling of being watched, even in the solitude of my own mind. The grand ballroom lay ahead, a cavernous space filled with the echoes of laughter from earlier that day, now replaced by an uneasy silence. My heart drummed in my chest as I pushed the heavy doors open. The polished wooden floors gleamed under the sporadic light, and I could almost hear the ghosts of previous dances swirling around me. A chill ran through me, but I pressed on, drawn by an inexplicable urge to uncover the truth. As I crossed the threshold, something glinted in the corner of my eye. I turned, but it was just a reflection from one of the ornate chandeliers swaying gently above. I inhaled deeply, the scent of salt water mingling with the metallic tang of fear. Familiar voices echoed in my memory, those of my fellow passengers who had vanished, Mark with his easy smile, Clara who always offered a kind word, and the old sailor who had warned me to stay away from the lower decks. Their absence weighed heavily like an anchor, dragging me into the depths of despair. Suddenly, the ballroom doors creaked open behind me. I whipped around, expecting to see someone, but no one stood there. The hallway was empty, the shadows stretching long and thin. I felt a knot coil within my stomach as dread seeped into my bones, forcing my feet to retreat. Just as I turned, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. In that moment of blackness, a voice whispered my name, a soft, ghostly echo that chilled my blood. Lila. It was distant, yet insistent, beckoning me. I staggered back, heart racing, and pressed my back against the wall, the coolness of the wood grounding me. I strained to make out the shape within the shadows that danced just beyond the flickering light, but nothing materialized before me. I took a cautious step forward, compelled by some unseen force. The whispers intensified, swirling around my head like a tempest. They spoke of loss, of pain and betrayal, and I felt myself drawn into their depths, captivated by the sorrow they promised to reveal. I blinked against the darkness, and when the lights returned, I found myself alone in the ballroom once more, the atmosphere thick with an unshakable tension. Just then, a loud bang echoed from the lower decks, a sound so forceful it sent vibrations through the air. The very walls seemed to shudder, and I recognized that I could no longer ignore the mounting dread that loomed over us all. I knew where I had to go. My heart hammered in my chest as I turned and fled the ballroom, racing through the corridors towards the source of the noise. Each step felt heavier, as if the ship were conspiring against me, the metal walls groaning in disapproval with every hurried footfall. I rounded corners, my breath quickening, the salty air now thick with the stench of something foul, as if the ocean had vomited its secrets onto the ship. Reaching the staircase leading to the lower decks, I hesitated. The stairs descended into darkness, the light bulbs flickering ominously above me. I remembered the old sailor's warning, the way his eyes had shimmered with fear when he spoke of that place. But I couldn't turn back now. I had to know what awaited me in that abyss. As I descended, the air grew colder, and the walls closed in around me. The steady rhythm of the ship's engines faded, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed against my ears. My instinct screamed at me to retreat, but something deeper urged me to continue. At the bottom, I found a long, narrow hallway with damp walls that oozed with an unsettling moisture. A strange whispering echoed along the corridor, tugging at the edges of my sanity. I moved cautiously, each step measured as I approached a door at the far end, slightly ajar. My breathing quickened, a desperate race against the pounding in my chest. I pushed the door open, revealing what appeared to be the ship's maintenance room. Tools lay strewn across a dusty workbench, and the air felt thick with neglect, as if it hadn't been touched in years. But it was what lay in the corner that stole my breath. A dark shape shifted, revealing a figure crouched low. The shadows concealed its face, but I could see the glint of something metallic in one hand. I knew, instinctively, that this was no mere crew member, but something far more sinister. Lila, the voice beckoned once more, now familiar yet impossibly wrong. The figure rose, and I felt the cold grip of terror around my heart as I realized that it wore the face of someone I once knew. The resemblance sent waves of horror crashing over me, and I staggered back, unable to comprehend the grotesque transformation that had taken place. This was just the beginning. The horrors aboard the ship were real, and the nightmare was about to unveil its tragic truth. The air on the cruise ship had reached a stifling humidity as night fell, blanketing the deck in a thick fog. It felt as if the ship had been swallowed by an unseen entity, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses fading behind the eerie silence that now enveloped me. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white, as I stared into the murky waters below. The ocean had transformed from a tranquil blue into an ominous black, its depths concealing secrets I was too terrified to contemplate. In the days leading up to this moment, I had witnessed a series of inexplicable events. Passengers had gone missing, their absence marked only by the hushed whispers and furtive glances exchanged among those left behind. I had tried to convince myself it was merely the collective paranoia of an isolated group trapped on a floating fortress, but the unease gnawed at me like a hungry beast. I turned away from the railing, the chill of the sea breeze prickling my skin. My cabin had become my sanctuary, a small space that felt increasingly claustrophobic with each passing hour. The flickering light overhead cast uneven shadows on the walls, making them appear to warp and twist, as if the very structure of the ship was alive. The low thrumming of the engines vibrated through the floor, a constant reminder of the ship's relentless journey across the abyss. I had made a decision. I needed to investigate. My investigation had slowly morphed from idle curiosity to something more urgent. I found myself drawn to the abandoned corridors, the places where laughter had once thrived but now echoed with silence. On more than one occasion, I had stumbled across the discarded possessions of those who had vanished. A red scarf hung limply from a door handle, A child's toy lay forgotten in a corner, and there was an unsettling feeling that each item I found was a breadcrumb leading deeper into darkness. I knew I had to go to the bowels of the ship, where the crew had often warned passengers not to stray. The crew had become increasingly antagonistic, their smiles fixed and their eyes vacant. I had overheard whispers of something dark lurking beneath the surface, something that thrived on the fear of those aboard. Grabbing a flashlight, I quietly slipped out of my cabin and into the dimly lit hallway. The corridor stretched before me, lined with doors that seemed to close in, their surfaces marred with peeling paint and rust. I moved cautiously, listening for any sign of life. The ship felt like a ghost, haunting its own memories while cradling the secrets of the deep. As I descended into the lower levels, the air grew cooler, the hum of the engines fading to a distant murmur. I passed through narrow hallways adorned with flickering emergency lights, their erratic glow casting long shadows that danced unnaturally. I didn't know what I was searching for, answers, perhaps, or a way to escape the suffocating dread that clung to my skin. Then, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping that echoed through the darkness. My heart raced, each beat a thunderous percussion in the otherwise muted atmosphere. I followed the sound, each step cautious as dread coiled tightly around my chest. The tapping grew louder, a morbid invitation urging me further down into the ship's underbelly. I arrived at a door, heavy and reinforced. The tapping came from within, an insistence that felt both desperate and taunting. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to turn back, but curiosity clawed at me. I pushed the door open, the hinges protesting with a low groan. Inside was a small room, dimly lit by a single bulb that hung from the ceiling, casting a sickly glow over the scene. The walls were lined with pictures of smiling passengers, families, couples, friends, all taken at the height of joy. But the floor was littered with belongings, a chaotic array of clothing, suitcases, and items I recognized from the missing. There was a faint, acrid odor that reminded me of rust and decay. In the center of the room sat a figure hunched over, tapping its fingers against the floor, oblivious to my presence. As I stepped closer, dread pulled in my stomach. The figure looked up, revealing a face gaunt and hollow, eyes sunken and devoid of life. "Help me," it rasped, the words slipping past cracked lips. They take them at night." A cold wave of realization crashed over me. This wasn't just a cabin for storage, it was a holding place, a purgatory for the lost. The figure's eyes glimmered with a mix of hope and despair, a reflection of the darkness that had seeped into our shared reality. "What do you mean? Who takes them?" I stammered, stepping back, the doorframe suddenly feeling like the last bastion between me and the unknown. "They drown," it whispered, desperation lining every word. "Into the depths. They're called by the sea." Before I could respond, a sound erupted from outside, shouts mixed with a crashing noise that echoed through the ship. The figure's eyes widened in terror, and it darted towards me, grasping my arm with a strength that belied its frail appearance. "You have to get out. They're coming for you, too." I tore myself away, but not before the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged within me as I stumbled backward, the figure's terrified pleas echoing in my ears. I had to escape before whatever haunted these souls found me. With the flashlight now the only source of light, I turned and bolted, the sound of rushing water filling my ears as I retraced my steps. The ship felt alive beneath my feet, a predator awakening from slumber, and I was its prey. The ship rocked gently, the ocean lapping rhythmically against the hull like a lover's whisper. I had always found comfort in the sound, but now it felt sinister, a mockery of my unease. The lingering tension from the events of the past few days had woven itself into the fabric of the ship, curling around me like the fog that obscured the horizon. I stood on my balcony, staring into the endless blackness of the sea, trying to shake the feeling that something was lurking just beneath the surface. I had barely slept since the disappearance of Helen and Marlin. The chilling realization that they had simply vanished was gnawing at my insides like a rat in a trap. I could still hear the faint echoes of their laughter, memories now tainted with dread. Each creak of the ship felt amplified, a harbinger of more sinister occurrences. I decided to leave my cabin, despite the gnawing instinct to hide away until morning. The ship was alive with the chatter of passengers who were blissfully unaware of the mounting dread that gripped my heart. The glow of the lanterns cast flickering shadows across the deck, and I found myself wandering toward the dining hall. Perhaps I could distract myself with food, a small reprieve from the gnawing anxiety. As I stepped inside, the rich aroma of smoked salmon and roasted vegetables wafted through the air, but my appetite had fled. The dining room was nearly empty, a stark contrast to the boisterous evenings we had shared just days before. A few couples lingered over wine, their laughter punctuated by nervous glances, as if they too sensed something had changed in the air. I spotted a familiar face, Carla, sitting alone at a table near the window. Her eyes were red-rimmed, a testament to sleepless nights. I approached her, a lump forming in my throat. "Have you seen Helen or Marlon?" She shook her head slowly, her fingers trembling as she toyed with the edge of her napkin. "I thought they might be with you. I can't shake this feeling that something is wrong. It's as if the ship itself is holding its breath." I forced a smile, though it felt brittle. "I'm sure they're fine. They probably got caught up in something." But even as I said it, I felt the weight of my own words crushing me. The truth was far too convoluted, and I couldn't bring myself to voice the darker thoughts coiling within me. After a few minutes of strained conversation, I excused myself, unable to bear the silence that now encased the dining room. I wandered the ship's corridors, the air thick with the scent of varnish and salt. As I passed a series of closed cabin doors, I felt a chill run down my spine. The walls seemed to close in around me, whispering secrets I dared not listen to. My mind drifted back to the last time we had been together, Marlin's spirited tales of the ocean, Helen's infectious laughter echoing in the night. I could almost hear them now, but the laughter morphed into a taunting symphony that clawed at my sanity. I rounded a corner and paused outside the crew quarters. For reasons I couldn't articulate, I felt compelled to knock. The secluded area loomed with shadows, the dim lighting flickering like a heartbeat. I rapped my knuckles gently against the metal door, and to my surprise, it creaked open. A wiry man with sunken eyes stood before me, his uniform slightly tattered. "Can I help you?" His voice was flat, devoid of interest. I'm looking for Helen and Marlon. Have you seen them?" I asked, searching his expression for any hint of recognition. He blinked slowly, as if processing my words was a laborious task. "No one has seen them. You should leave this area. It's not safe." His insistence sent shivers racing down my spine, but I pressed on. "What do you mean? Why isn't it safe?" Before he could respond, a cacophony erupted behind me, a scream that spiraled into the air like a wounded animal. My heart raced as I turned on my heel, sprinting back toward the main deck. Panic surged through me, electrifying every nerve in my body. As I burst through the doors, I saw a crowd gathered near the railing. The scene that unfolded before me sent a wave of nausea crashing through my stomach. A woman lay sprawled on the deck, her face pale and twisted in terror. It was Carla. The people around her were shouting, their voices a chaotic blend of fear and confusion. I pushed through the throng, my heart pounding as I knelt beside her. "Carla, can you hear me?" I whispered, gripping her shoulders. She didn't respond, her eyes stared blankly at the sky, as if she were reaching for something far beyond my grasp. Then I noticed it, a dark fluid pooling around her, glistening ominously under the ship's lights. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just fear that gripped me now, it was the visceral knowledge that something was terribly wrong. I felt a hand on my shoulder, jerking me from the nightmare. It was the wiry crew member from before, his face a mask of urgency. "We need to get everyone inside. Now!" The ship swayed beneath us, and the lights flickered ominously, plunging the area into darkness for a heartbeat before returning. As I looked back at Carla, I felt the weight of dread settle over me like a suffocating shroud. Something had changed irrevocably aboard the ship, and I was desperate to discover what had claimed my friends and now threatened us all. The sea rumbled beneath us, a deep and foreboding growl that sent shivers down my spine. I realized then that we were not alone. We were being watched. The ship rocked gently as the morning light slipped through the cabin's heavy drapes, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I lay on the narrow bed, an unsettling urge to leap up and flee gripping my chest. The muffled sounds of activity outside my door fell away as I wrestled with the sobering memory of the night before. I could still hear the echoes of desperate cries and the chilling silence that followed, a stark reminder of what had transpired. I had hoped the dawn would bring with it clarity, perhaps a logical explanation for the horrors I'd witnessed. Instead, the oppressive weight of dread settled upon me as vividly as the salt air that seeped through the cracks in the ship's aging hull. I finally pushed myself upright, every joint creaking in protest. A knot of anxiety twisted in my stomach as I swung my legs over the side of the bed, cold wood pressing against my feet. After dressing, I took a deep breath and moved toward the cabin door. I hesitated, wondering if the night had birthed more than just nightmares. The thought that something, or someone, had invaded our dreams and reality flickered in my mind like a dying flame. I grasped the handle and turned it slowly. The sound of the latch clicking filled the confined space, like a countdown to an inevitable calamity. The corridor outside felt unnaturally quiet. As I stepped into the narrow passageway, shadows pulled in the corners, and I instinctively shivered. The ship's low hum, once a comforting backdrop, now resonated ominously in my ears. I approached the nearest stairwell, my heart thudding in rhythm with each footfall. I needed answers, and I knew they would be found above, where the crew congregated. As I ascended, a sense of trepidation coiled tighter in my chest. The higher I climbed, the more the sounds of the ship echoed strangely around me. The laughter and chatter of passengers that had once seemed so alive now felt warped, muffled as if the very walls absorbed their joy. Reaching the deck, I was greeted by an unsettling sight. A few passengers wandered aimlessly, their eyes vacant, movements mechanical. I spotted one woman standing at the railing, seemingly transfixed by the endless ocean stretching out before us. I approached her cautiously. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely breaking through the thick air. She turned slowly, her gaze unfocused, and I recoiled slightly as I caught a glimpse of her pallid complexion and the way her mouth hung open, as if waiting for something to speak but never receiving it. "Help them," she whispered, her voice a hollow echo of despair. I glanced around, searching for what she meant. But no one else seemed to notice her distress, and a shiver rippled through me as I realized the atmosphere was saturated with an unshakable tension. Before I could respond, a sudden commotion erupted toward the back of the deck. Crew members rushed past, urgency etched upon their faces. I followed, propelled by an instinctive need to uncover the truth. As I reached the crowd, I pushed my way to the front. What I saw chilled me to the bone. One of the crew members lay sprawled on the ground, eyes wide and unseeing, a thick pool of crimson spreading across the deck, mingling with the salt and spray of the ocean. My stomach churned. I stepped back just as another passenger screamed, the sound shrill and piercing. Several crew members were knelt beside the fallen man, frantically attempting to revive him, but I could see it was futile. An onlooker whispered something about a heart attack, but I sensed there was more than mere medical collapse at play. The growing crowd murmured uneasily, casting furtive glances towards the horizon as if expecting the very sea to seep onto the ship, to drag us under into its depths. A creeping fear gripped me in its icy grasp. What if this was just the beginning? What if the darkness that had seeped into our minds had also invaded our bodies? After what felt like an eternity, the crew managed to clear the area, and the crowd began to disperse. I caught sight of the woman again, still at the rail, staring out at the vast expanse of water. Desperation clawed at my throat. Why is this happening? I pleaded, hoping she could provide solace. Suddenly, a deep rumble echoed beneath my feet. The ship shuddered violently, and panic erupted again. People screamed, some ran toward the life rafts, while others stood frozen, paralyzed by fear. I stumbled backward, my heart racing as the ship's alarms blared, red lights flashing ominously overhead. All around us, chaos unfolded. Shadows seemed to stretch and warp across the deck as a thick fog rolled in from the ocean, obscuring our view. I felt a primal urge to survive. I had to find a way off this ship. I turned to leave, but the woman grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "You cannot leave," she whispered urgently. "We are bound." Her words sent a surge of ice through me, and I wrenched free, my mind racing. I needed to get to the lower decks, to gather supplies, and to find others. I sprinted back toward the stairs, the sounds of chaos fading behind me as I descended into the ship's bowels. As the weight of the darkness pressed in, I knew I was running out of time. Something was coming, and I wouldn't be able to escape it much longer. I would find the truth, even if it meant facing the very worst of what lay in wait. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a bruised sky that mirrored the turmoil in my chest. The endless expanse of the ocean, once a tranquil blue, now seemed like a vast, dark void, swallowing the last remnants of light. I stood on the deck of the cruise ship, gripped by an unease that settled heavily in my gut. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to ward off the chill that seeped into my bones. It had been days since the first disappearance, the night my brother Leo vanished without a trace. The ship's crew had initially dismissed our concerns as overreactions, lost in the vastness of the sea. Guests continued to mingle and laugh, oblivious to the mounting dread that crept along the corridors like a phantom. Each night, I found myself returning to the same spot on the deck, searching for any sign of him, my heart echoing with the thoughts of what might have happened. After Leo's disappearance, strange things began happening on the ship. It started with whispers, hushed conversations between passengers that turned into frantic arguments. I overheard snippets about a ghostly figure in the halls, unsettling sounds echoing from the lower decks, and distorted laughter that didn't belong to anyone on board. I brushed these tales aside, attributing them to the stress of our situation and the isolation that came with being surrounded by water. Yet, in the stillness of the night, I found myself questioning my own sanity. The darkness felt alive, as if it were watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. My nights were filled with insomnia. Sleep evaded me, leaving behind a lingering sense of dread. I felt the ship sway beneath me, the gentle rocking now an unsettling reminder of what lay beneath the surface. Determined to search for answers, I made my way to the lower decks, where the crew had warned us not to go. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I descended, casting eerie shadows on the metal walls. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, a deafening drum echoing my fear. The air grew colder, dampened by the scent of salt and rust. As I reached the crew quarters, I noticed the door slightly ajar. A shiver ran down my spine. I hesitated but pushed it open, driven by desperation. Inside, the room was small and cramped, filled with the clutter of uniforms and personal items. There, in the corner, I spotted a logbook on a rickety table. I glanced around, ensuring I was alone before flipping it open. The pages were filled with entries detailing mundane tasks and passenger complaints, but one particular entry caught my eye, a note about strange sounds emanating from the engine room. My breath quickened. I needed to know more. I left the crew quarters, my pulse racing as I found my way to the engine room. It was located deep within the bowels of the ship, a place that felt like a sanctuary for secrets. The narrow corridor leading there was dimly lit, shadows dancing at the edges of my vision. As I neared the entrance, the air grew thick, electric with an unseen tension. I paused, listening intently. A low rumble resonated within, accompanied by a series of metallic clanks. I stepped closer, the sound of my breath mingling with the ominous echoes. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I pressed on. Inside, the engine room was a cacophony of noise and machinery. Steam hissed, and the smell of oil lingered heavily in the air. I squinted into the shadows, searching for the source of the sound. The room was cluttered with pipes and machinery, the humming of engines creating a discordant symphony that reverberated in my bones. And then I heard it, a whisper, barely audible over the din, seeping from the darkness. "Help me." It was Leo's voice, or at least I thought it was. I felt a rush of adrenaline. My brother was alive. He had to be. I stepped forward, my heart pounding as the whisper grew more frantic. "Help me." It was unmistakably Leo, distorted and echoing around me. I charged deeper into the room, driven by a force I couldn't quell. I felt my way through the machinery, the oil-slicked floor making every step treacherous. "Leo!" I shouted into the gloom, my voice swallowed by the mechanical growl. I strained to hear him, to catch any sign of him. But instead, a sudden crash resonated behind me, sending a shock through the air. I turned, fear pooling in my stomach as I saw a shadow shift in the darkness. "Who's there?" I called, trying to mask my trepidation. The shifting stopped, and silence fell. I could hardly breathe, my instincts telling me to run, but the voice persisted, faint and pleading. I turned back to the machinery, my desperation overriding my fear. I needed to find Leo. As I inched closer, I felt something cold graze my ankle, and I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing. My heart raced as I looked down, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. Instead, there was nothing but darkness and the whirring of the engines. My breath hitched, and I glanced back, the shadow now looming larger. "Help!" The voice cried again, more desperate. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently before plunging the room into darkness. My heart dropped. I was alone in the abyss, with only the whispers of the machinery and the pulse of the sea around me. The realization hit me like ice water. Whatever was in the shadows didn't belong to this world. I stumbled back, panic clawing at my throat. There was no way out, and no one would hear me scream. The ship groaned like a wounded beast, the sound reverberating through the hollow corridors of the lower deck. I stood at the edge of the dimly lit hallway, the ambient light from the emergency exit sign casting an eerie red glow on the rusty metal walls. I had been wandering the labyrinth of the cruise ship for what felt like hours, trying to piece together the fragmented memories of the night before, desperately clinging to the hope that I might find anyone who could explain what was happening. Panic had settled deep in my bones, curling around my heart like tendrils of smoke. The last I remembered was the party on the deck where laughter mingled with the salty breeze, the stars gleaming above like diamonds. But that night had twisted into something grotesque. I recalled snatches of chaos, screams filtering through the fog of my memory, faces distorted with terror, and the unmistakable scent of fear that permeated the air. I shivered, the chill seeping into my skin, and took a cautious step forward. The floor creaked under my weight, the ship's unsettling rhythm echoing my unease. I had to find the others. I had to understand. Each door I passed was bolted shut, as if the ship itself sought to contain whatever horror lurked within its bowels. I could hear muffled voices occasionally, but they were always just out of reach, leaving me isolated in my growing dread. My heart raced as I recalled the cryptic message I had found scrawled in blood on the walls of the dining hall. "They are watching. Do not trust anyone." Who were they? The thought sent another wave of trepidation rolling through me. As I moved deeper into the ship, shadows flickered along the walls, their movements unsettling in their irregularity. I paused, listening intently, and for a moment all I could hear was the soft lull of the ocean beneath us. Then, a loud bang echoed from the direction I had just come, followed by a series of frantic footsteps. My instinct screamed at me to hide, but there was nowhere to go, no sanctuary in this floating nightmare. "Help!" A voice cried out from behind. I spun around, recognizing it instantly. It was Sam, my friend from the party. His eyes were wild, darting back and forth like a cornered animal, and his shirt was torn, smeared with what looked like thick, dark stains. "Sam!" I shouted, relief flooding through me. "What happened?" He stumbled forward, grasping my arm tightly as if I were a lifeline. "We need to get out of here." There, his voice dropped to a whisper, cutting off as his gaze flicked toward the end of the corridor. "They're hunting us." A shiver ran down my spine, and I glanced behind us, straining to hear any indication of what pursued us. "How many are with you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the rising tide of fear. "Just me. The others, they didn't make it." His voice cracked, and I could see the haunted look in his eyes. "We have to find a way up. We can't stay down here." "Okay," I replied, trying to maintain a semblance of calm. "Let's move." We hurried along the corridor, our footsteps muted against the cold steel floor. The air grew thicker with each step, filled with a sense of dread that clung to me like a shroud. I could feel the tension building, an undercurrent of something sinister that pulsated through the ship's infrastructure. Suddenly, a loud crash erupted from a nearby cabin, causing both of us to jump. The door flew open, and a figure stumbled out, eyes wide with terror. It was Lisa, another friend from the group. Her hair was disheveled, and her clothes were torn in places. "Thank God," she exclaimed, her voice shaking. I thought I was the only one left. Sam and I exchanged a glance, both of us silently acknowledging the growing weight of our situation. We couldn't afford to lose anyone else. "What do you know?" I asked, desperate for information, every nerve in my body stretched taut. "They're hunting us," she echoed Sam, fear leaking into her voice. "I saw them. They're not human. They move in shadows, and when they get close, I can feel them in my head. It's like they want to take control, to make us one of them." I swallowed hard, grappling with the implications of her words. "We need to find the others. We can't fight this alone." "We should go up," Sam suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. "To the bridge. It might be the only place left where we can find help." Just as I nodded in agreement, a resounding thud echoed through the ship, and the lights flickered ominously above us. The ship shuddered again, and my heart sank as I realized that whatever was pursuing us was closing in. "Run!" I shouted, and we bolted down the corridor, fear driving our feet as we raced toward the staircase leading upwards. Behind us, the darkness seemed to pulse, a living entity determined to swallow us whole. As we ascended, the air grew heavier, electric with a perverse energy that clung to our skin. I could hear whispers now, a cacophony of voices that clawed at my sanity, urging me to turn back. But I pressed on, the desperate need to survive pushing me further into the unknown. With every step, I felt the ship holding its breath, waiting, watching. And I knew, deep down, that whatever lay ahead would either seal our fate or offer a glimmer of hope. The sea had turned a deep, unsettling gray, as if the clouds had thickened with malevolence just for us. I stood on the deck, clutching the cold steel railing, while the wind whipped through my hair, blinding me with salty spray. The horizon was a jagged line of darkness, and I could almost hear the whispers of the deep, calling out from the void below. I had hoped to find some sense of clarity, but instead, I felt as if I were losing my grip on reality. It had been days since we had realized that something was wrong on this cruise ship, the SS Elysium. What had begun as a relaxing escape from the drudgery of everyday life had turned into a nightmarish descent into confusion and dread. The crew was nowhere to be found, and the few passengers still roaming the ship spoke only in frantic whispers and fearful glances. I had been tracking the disappearances, first the children, then a couple in their 40s, and finally a young man who had tried to make a break for the lifeboats. Each time, I felt a piece of my sanity fraying as I witnessed their absence unacknowledged by the remaining souls aboard. Every corner of the ship was scrutinized, but no answers surfaced, only more questions that twisted in my mind like the relentless waves crashing against the hull. Back in our cabin, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers twitching nervously. I could see the anxiety etched into her features, the fear invading her spirit. "We have to get off this ship," she insisted, her voice strained. "If they don't come back soon, we need to find a way to save ourselves." I nodded, but dread settled like a stone in my gut. The life rafts had been tampered with, or so we suspected, given the sinister photographs that had appeared mysteriously on my phone, the smiles of passengers who had vanished. I had shown them to Sarah, and the look on her face echoed the terror that gnawed at my thoughts. "The captain must know something," I said, trying to sound encouraging even as doubt gnawed at me. "We should go to the bridge, Anne." "No!" "We should just get off this ship," she interrupted, her eyes wild. A gust of wind rattled the cabin door, and we both jumped. "They're not coming back, and we're next." Her words sent a chill racing down my spine. I had been trying to convince myself that fear was a game played by the mind, but as I stared into her eyes, I realized that our desperation was not unfounded. Something was lurking in the shadows, something far more sinister than the specter of our imaginations. "Let's check the lower decks," I suggested, a plan forming in my mind. If the crew was abandoning their posts, perhaps we could find a way to access the lifeboats unnoticed. The thought of descending into the bowels of the ship felt like stepping into an abyss, but it was better than waiting to be claimed by whatever malevolence loomed above us. As we made our way through the dimly lit corridors, the atmosphere grew thicker, almost palpable with dread. The only sound was the echo of our footsteps against the cold steel floor, and in those moments, I felt like we were trudging through a graveyard of lost souls. Flickering lights buzzed overhead, casting erratic shadows that danced and warped against the walls, creating figures that seemed to reach out for us. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, halting abruptly. I strained to listen. A distant thud reverberated through the ship, followed by a low, eerie hum that seemed to emerge from nowhere. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. "Keep moving," I urged, gripping her hand tighter. We reached the crew quarters, where the air was stale and suffocating. The door to the galley stood ajar, swinging slightly as if inviting us into its depths. I pushed it open, revealing the chaos inside, a few plates scattered on the floor, the remnants of meals abandoned mid-preparation. Signs of struggle marked the space, a chair toppled on its side, a knife embedded into the wooden counter. "Where is everyone?" Sarah's voice cracked, the panic spilling into the silence. "I don't know." I stepped further inside, scanning the room. "But we need to keep moving." As we turned to leave, a loud crash echoed from behind us, making my heart race. I spun around, and the knife was gone from the counter. An empty void where it had once been. "I don't like this," Sarah whimpered, her voice trembling. Before I could respond, the lights flickered violently, plunging us into darkness. The air turned cold, an unnatural chill sweeping through the galley. I fumbled for my phone, the screen lighting up just enough to cut through the blackness. "Stay close," I urged, but the beam of light trembled in my hand as I pointed it around the room. A shadow shifted at the far end, a darkness deeper than the surrounding void. The hum I had heard earlier escalated into a low roar, reverberating through the ship's hull. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave, and I felt the urge to flee. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the passageway we had come through, heavy and deliberate. "Who's there?" someone called, their voice warped and distant. Before I could react, the door slammed shut, plunging us into darkness. Sarah screamed, a sound of pure terror that pierced the air. I reached out for her, but the ship groaned and shuddered as if it were alive, intent on sealing us within its belly forever. "Sarah!" I shouted, my voice cracking. I scrambled toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The noise from outside grew louder, and I could hear the unmistakable sound of something scraping against the steel walls. The ship was alive, feeding our fear, trapping us in its grasp. I turned back to where I last saw Sarah, panic flooding my veins. "Sarah!" I yelled again, my heart pounding as the scraping intensified. Just as I caught sight of her silhouette, the lights flickered back on, casting a harsh glow around us. In my sudden clarity, I saw her standing there, her eyes wide with terror. Behind her, a figure emerged from the shadows, pale and gaunt, its face twisted into a grotesque grin. Time froze as I realized we weren't alone. The ship's engine roared beneath me, a constant reminder that I was still trapped on the floating monstrosity. Waves crashed against the hull, sending rhythmic tremors up through the floorboards. I leaned against the cold metal railing of the balcony, the salty air biting at my exposed skin. The night was moonless, cloaked in a shadow thick enough to swallow the horizon. It had been nearly a week since the disappearances had begun, each day marked by the growing dread knotting in my stomach. Just that morning, I had seen Trevor's name scrawled across the missing persons board in the common area. I had spoken to him just before he vanished, our conversation circling around the rumors of strange noises emanating from the engine room. His face had been pale, eyes wide with something unnameable. I shivered now, recalling the way he had hastily swallowed his fear, offering a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. I heard the faint sound of footsteps behind me, and my heart raced. At first, I thought it was just the ship groaning against the waves, but then the steps grew louder, deliberate. Turning slowly, I faced the corridor leading away from the balcony. Shadows danced along the walls, each flicker pulling tighter the veil of unease that had settled over me. "Is anyone there?" I called, my voice hoarse and rattling. Silence answered, save for the distant thrum of the engine. I had learned to be cautious. The crew had become more secretive as the days passed. They moved in clusters, whispering urgently amongst themselves, their eyes darting around as if they expected the darkness to reach out and snatch them away. It wasn't just the passengers who had gone missing. Crew members had vanished too. I had confirmed it with Jerry, a bartender I had grown close to during my time on the ship. He had told me in hushed tones that the captain was acting strange, often locking himself in his quarters for hours. Determined, I stepped away from the railing, my instincts drawn to the engine room. It felt like the heart of the ship. Perhaps it was also the source of the terror that had taken root among us. I crept down the narrow corridor, my senses heightened. Each creak of the floorboards felt like an echo of something sinister lurking just out of sight. As I approached the heavy door barring entry to the engine room, my pulse quickened. It loomed before me, an iron sentinel, the smell of grease and metal seeping through the cracks. I hesitated, pressing my ear against the cold surface, straining to hear any signs of life. All I could discern was the sound of machinery, a steady thrum that vibrated through my bones. With a deep breath, I grasped the handle and pulled. The door protested, hinges squealing as it creaked open. Darkness enveloped me, swallowing the dim light from the corridor. I stepped inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. The engine room was expansive, filled with towering machinery and shadowy corners. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness like a knife. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, illuminated by the sterile white light. The engines churned below, their relentless rhythm creating a sound both mechanical and alive, like the heartbeat of some enormous beast. "Trevor?" I called again, my voice trembling. A sudden clang echoed from somewhere deeper within, jolting me. I pivoted, my light sweeping over the room. The sound had come from the far side, near the control panel that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I retraced my steps, dread coiling tight within me as I moved deeper into the belly of the beast. I reached the panel, my light revealing a series of tangled wires and gauges that flickered ominously. My heart sank as I noticed something on the ground, a dark patch soaking into the floor beneath the panel. I crouched down, and my stomach twisted as the smell hit me. It was metallic and acrid, like rusted iron. A chill crept up my spine, and as I touched the ground, my fingers brushed against something slick. I recoiled, shining the light down. It was blood, fresh, dark, and seeping into the cracks of the metal floor. Fear surged through me, quickening my breath, but I had to know. I had to find Trevor. I stood up, scanning the rest of the room, when I caught a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, my breath suspended in my throat. There, in the shadows, was a figure. Pale and gaunt, it stood with its back to me, head tilted as if listening intently to the humming engines. A wave of recognition washed over me, and I opened my mouth to call out, but the figure turned suddenly, a face contorted with terror and something else, something primal. I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor, its beam flickering wildly before plunging the room back into darkness. I fumbled for the light, my fingers trembling as I regrouped, but when I looked up again, the figure was gone. The air thickened around me. I felt watched. The shadows twisted, and the heartbeat of the ship seemed to increase, pounding in my ears. I turned to make my escape, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside with the engines that roared like a wrathful god. Panic surged through me, and I pounded against the door, shouting for help. But my voice swallowed by the steel walls, all I could hear was the echoing roar of the engines and the creeping realization that whatever had been taken from this ship had not yet finished its work. The cruise ship rocked gently beneath me, the rhythmic motion almost comforting in the unforgiving chaos of the last few days. But comfort was a cruel illusion aboard the Serenity Voyager, a ship that had transformed from a floating paradise into a chamber of dread. I leaned against the cold metal railing of the balcony, the salt-laden breeze biting my skin. The ocean stretched infinitely before me, black as the depths of my own fears. I had heard whispers, fragments of conversations that tangled with the wind, a crew member missing, passengers behaving strangely. It felt like the ship was a living entity, each creak and groan a voice echoing its dark secrets. I could no longer deny the truth, something was very wrong. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a canvas of bruised violet skies. I had resolved to gather information, to confront the reality that had gradually unfurled around me like a shroud. With each passing hour, anxiety coiled tighter in my chest, the whispers clamoring louder in my mind. Alone, I scoured the corridors, my footsteps swallowed by the damp carpet. The ship, with its lavish decor and faux marble pillars, became a labyrinth of shadows. I'd overheard a conversation earlier in the day, a frantic exchange between two crew members outside the staff lounge. They hadn't seen me, but their urgency clung to the air like smoke. "We can't keep this quiet for long," one of them had said, his voice hushed but edged with panic. I had made my way to the lounge, but it was empty, the remnants of discarded drinks and plates bearing witness to an earlier revelry now eclipsed by tension. I turned to leave when a sound froze me in place, a low thud from the deck above. It was followed by a scratchy whisper, barely audible, as if the walls themselves were trying to warn me. I ascended the staircase cautiously, propelled by a mix of dread and curiosity. The higher I climbed, the heavier the air became, thick with something unnameable and foul. The echoing silence seemed to mock me, every creak of the ship resonated like a warning chime. At the top of the stairs, the door to the crew quarters lay slightly ajar. I hesitated, my heart racing. The thought of stepping inside felt like entering the maw of a beast. But I had to know. I pushed the door, which swung open, revealing a narrow hallway lined with doors that felt oppressive in their sameness. I crept down the corridor, drawn to a door at the far end. It stood closed, but a flickering light seeped from beneath the crack. I knocked softly, my knuckles brushing the weathered wood. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. No answer came, only the steady hum of the ship's engines beneath. I knocked again, louder this time, the echo bouncing back in mocking defiance. Finally, I turned the knob and stepped inside. The small room was cluttered with personal items, clothes strewn about, a half-eaten meal on the desk, but no one was there. My pulse quickened as I scanned the cramped space. A single drawer caught my eye, slightly ajar, and without thinking, I pulled it open. Inside, I found a collection of strange trinkets, a small dagger, a tattered book with pages yellowed by time, and photographs of passengers, each one marked with a date and a word scrawled beneath, "Chosen." The air thickened as I flipped through the pages of the book. It contained names, lists that seemed to date back months, each entry meticulously noted. Panic surged through me. Were these people missing? Were they dead? I dropped the book, my heart racing as I stumbled backward, crashing against the desk. The sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor, and I scrambled to gather myself, my mind racing. I had to leave before someone found me rifling through their secrets. I darted towards the door, but it swung open before I could reach it. A crew member stood there, eyes wide, his face pale in the dim light. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, voice low but laced with urgency. I stuttered, trying to form a coherent response, but the words fled. There was something in his eyes, fear mingled with desperation, which only fueled my own. "You need to go. Now. Why? What's happening?" "They're watching. All of us." "You don't understand," he replied, glancing over his shoulder as if he expected the walls to close in on us. "Who is? What's coming?" He opened his mouth to speak, but a sudden commotion erupted from the deck below. Alarms blared, red lights flashing in a frantic strobe around us. My heart sank, a sinking dread settled in my stomach. "Run!" He shoved me backwards as he bolted down the hallway, the urgency of his voice driving me to follow. We raced through the labyrinthine ship, the sound of our footsteps drowned out by the rising chaos. As we descended the stairs, I glanced back. The shadows seemed to writhe, and for a moment, I thought I saw figures lurking just beyond the doorways, their faces obscured but their eyes glimmering with malevolence. "Where are we going?" I shouted above the clamor. "Anywhere but here," he yelled, desperation coloring his tone. But as we dashed towards an emergency exit, a chilling realization settled in my gut. The true horror of this ship had only just begun to reveal itself. The ship drifted silently, a leviathan holding its breath beneath a sky smudged with dusk. The buzz of laughter and music had faded, leaving only the creaking of metal as a ghostly reminder of the life that once throbbed through the decks. It was unsettling to think that just a day earlier, the vessel had felt alive, vibrant, filled with the energy of passengers blissfully unaware of the shadows lurking in the corners of their laughter. Now, with each tick of the clock, the air grew heavier, a tangible weight pressing against my chest as I peered out onto the dark water. The last I had heard from Sarah was a soft whisper before she slipped into the depths of the ship, a promise to find help. I had waited, my heart drumming against my ribs, the echo of eerie silence taunting me. Hours had passed since she vanished, and panic gnawed at the edges of my mind like the tide against the hull. I knew I had to move. The dim, flickering lights along the corridor flickered ominously, casting jagged shadows that seemed to tease me with the threat of unseen eyes. I gripped the railing, my fingers trembling as I recalled the things we had seen, the shadows that flitted just out of sight, the strange noises echoing through the ship as if someone or something was following us. "Sarah," I called, my voice swallowed by the oppressive quiet. No answer. I took a breath, fighting back the rising tide of dread. She wouldn't have abandoned me. Not like this. I moved cautiously, each footstep echoing in the silence, feeling the ship sway beneath me as if trying to shake off a hidden presence. My flashlight flickered, the beam wavering as I pressed into the gut of the ship. The lower decks felt wrong, smelled wrong, like something rotting just out of sight. I brushed past doors marked with rusty numbers, their handles cold beneath my palm. "Where are you?" I whispered, the question hanging in the air like a prayer. My answer came not in sound, but in a sudden chill that wrapped around me, a biting wind that felt like an icy hand against my neck. I paused, the instinct to turn back clawing at my resolve. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I took a step further into the darkness, guided only by the faint glimmer of my flashlight. The beam danced across the corridor, revealing peeling paint and the odd scuff mark as if something had been dragged along the floor. I felt as if I were trespassing into a world that was not my own, where the walls whispered secrets and the air crackled with unseen tension. In the distance, a muffled thud followed by what seemed like a soft cry. My heart leaped. "Sarah?" I rushed forward, ignoring the warnings that screamed in my mind. I turned a corner, moving deeper into the bowels of the ship until I reached a door slightly ajar, a faint light spilling into the hallway. "Sarah?" I called again, pushing the door open. The room beyond was a storage hold, boxes stacked against the walls, their contents spilling out like the remnants of forgotten lives. The light flickered overhead, revealing an unsettling sight. The floor was smeared with dark, thick stains that twisted my stomach into knots. I stepped inside, cautious, my breath hitching as I realized the stains were not just rust. They looked like help. The cry came again, this time clearer, more desperate. It was Sarah. I darted across the room, following the sound, my heart racing in tandem with my pounding steps. There, nestled between two boxes, was a small doorway, slightly ajar. "Sarah!" I shouted, forcing the door open. It squeaked ominously as I squeezed through, finding myself in a narrow passage that felt suffocating. The walls closed in on me, the dim light revealing nothing but shadow. "Sarah!" Panic clawed at my throat as I pressed forward, the air growing colder with each step. I could sense it now, the weight of dread, a looming presence that watched from the darkness. The sounds of my voice echoed back, distorted and haunting, as if the ship itself were taunting me. Suddenly, the passage opened up into a wider room, and I stumbled into an underground bunker of sorts. The walls were lined with equipment, blinking lights, and old machinery that hummed ominously. In the center, a single figure stood, hunched over something. I squinted, my heart racing as I realized it wasn't Sarah. "Who are you?" I demanded, the words tumbling from my lips as adrenaline surged through me. The figure turned, revealing a gaunt face, eyes sunken deep as if drained of life. A chilling smile spread across their lips, and I felt my stomach drop. "Thought you'd lost her, didn't you?" they crooned, voice dripping with malice. I backed away, dread pooling in my gut. "What did you do to her?" "Nothing yet," the figure said, stepping closer, its shadow yawning over me. "But you're here now. How fortunate." I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me with a resounding thud. The air shifted, the temperature dropping as if the darkness itself had come alive. I could feel the presence creeping closer, a siphon of unearthly terror that sent shivers down my spine. "I have to find her," I gasped, my voice barely above a whisper, the reality of my situation crashing down like waves against the hull of the ship. "Not without paying a price." The figure's smile widened, revealing teeth too sharp and too many. I realized then that I was not merely running out of time. I was trapped in a nightmare, and there was no wake-up call awaiting me. The room seemed to pulse around me, breaths echoing from the shadows, and I knew whatever had happened aboard this ship, whatever haunted its depths, it was now awake, and I had just become part of its horrifying tale. The air felt thicker on the ship, a palpable tension that seemed to coil into the corners of every cabin and corridor, wrapping around me like an unyielding fog. I moved through the dimly lit hallways, the occasional flicker from the overhead lights adding a strobe-like uncertainty to my senses. The whispers of the ocean were muted, as if the waves were too afraid to disturb the secrets that lay below the surface, secrets that I had only begun to uncover. After the incident with Sarah, I had retreated into myself, a fragile shell of the person I once was. It was eerily quiet aboard the ship following her disappearance. The voices that had buzzed with excitement and laughter just days ago were now replaced by an oppressive silence. I found myself drawn to the lower decks, where the staff quarters were located, sensing that answers could be found in the shadows. As I descended the narrow staircase, the walls closed in around me, painted a dreary shade of beige that seemed to absorb the scant light. I reached the crew area, a labyrinth of cramped quarters and the faint, sour smell of dampness. A soft shuffle caught my attention, and I turned to see a steward standing at the end of the corridor, his face half hidden in the gloom. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. I hesitated, studying him. There was something unsettling about his gaze, a flicker of something unnameable that seemed to dart just beyond the surface. "No, I'm looking for someone." "Many are lost in this place," he replied cryptically, his eyes darting toward the door behind him. "You should go back to the upper decks, where it's safe." The suggestion felt hollow, a veil over the underlying threat that lingered in his tone. "I can't leave yet. I need to find Sarah." He shifted his weight, eyes narrowing. "You won't find what you're looking for down here." Ignoring the chill that crept up my spine, I stepped past him, dismissing his warning. The air turned colder, the atmosphere thickening with every step I took deeper into the crew's territory. My mind raced with memories of Sarah's laughter, the camaraderie we'd shared. Had she met the same fate as the others? I had to know. I swept through the narrow hallways, peering into the small cabins. Each door was closed, yet I could feel eyes watching me, shadows lurking just beyond the threshold. At the end of the corridor, I came upon a door marked staff only. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me inside. I pushed it open, and the creaking hinges echoed like a warning. The room was cluttered, filled with uniforms tossed aside and the faint scent of stale cigarettes. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting erratic shadows on the walls. In the corner stood a small table, covered with a stack of papers and an old radio. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had intruded on something private, something that I was never meant to uncover. As I began to sift through the papers, a coherent thought struck me, the stories from the crew members I had overheard. Tales of disappearances, of strange occurrences during past voyages. It all seemed to connect, an intricate web of dread and despair. My heart raced as I flipped through the documents, frantic for any clue. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, a disjointed voice cutting through the silence. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. The voice was garbled, but I could make out fragmented words, the depths, lost, never to return. The chilling realization that I might not be alone here gripped me like an icy hand clasping my throat. I turned to the door, the shadows outside shifting ominously. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to run back to safety, but a deeper curiosity rooted me in place. What were they hiding? What had they done to Sarah? I shut my eyes for a moment, forcing myself to breathe. It was then that I heard a faint sound, a soft tapping echoed from somewhere behind me. I turned, heart racing, my pulse thundering in my ears. The shadows seemed to deepen, thickening around the edges of the room. I took a cautious step toward the sound, each movement slow and deliberate. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. I traced my fingers along the wall until I found a small window, clouded with grime. Peering out, my stomach twisted. Below, the ocean roared and churned, angry waves crashing against the hull. But it wasn't the stormy sea that caught my attention. It was the dark figure standing at the edge of the ship, a mere silhouette against the night. My breath caught in my throat as recognition dawned. It was Sarah. I stumbled back, the papers scattering around me. The tapping turned into frantic banging as I tried to process the impossible. I rushed to the door, my heart pounding like a drum in my ears, my mind racing with fear. "Sarah," I shouted, my voice trembling. "I'm coming." I burst through the door, sprinting back into the corridor. The crew member I had encountered earlier stood waiting, a grim smile curling on his lips. "You shouldn't have gone in there," he said, his tone layered with amusement. Ignoring him, I pushed past, racing towards the stairs. The ship felt alive, the walls echoing with whispers that twisted through my mind. Every step I took was infused with the urgency of finding her, but also the looming dread of what lay ahead. Something was waiting for me in the dark, a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The stench of decay lingered in the narrow passageway, a foul reminder of the mysteries that had unraveled on this cursed cruise ship. I pressed against the cold metal of the wall, my heart racing as I listened for any sign of movement. The ship had shifted into a disquieting silence, broken only by the distant sound of water slapping against the hull. I was alone, or at least I hoped I was, but those shadows lurking in the corners of my mind told me otherwise. Just hours before, I had been trapped in my cabin, heart pounding in response to the eerie whispers threading through the air. It was as if the ship itself had come alive, pressing down on me with its sinister weight. Somewhere out there, in the belly of this floating tomb, my friends had disappeared one by one. First, it had been Lisa, with her infectious laughter, then Tom, who always had a knack for finding trouble. I could still hear them screaming, their pleas echoing in my ears as if the walls themselves were mocking me. I had spent the day trying to convince myself that I could escape this nightmare, that I could find a lifeboat and cut my losses. The lifeboat decks were eerily silent, the boats themselves untouched, as though the entire crew had vanished into thin air. I knew I was running out of time. If I didn't act soon, I would join the ranks of the lost. The corridor stretched out before me, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights. I could see shadows moving just beyond the reach of illumination, and with each passing moment, my resolve crumbled further. I turned back, considering retreating to my cabin, where I could lock myself away and pretend that everything would be fine. But a deep instinct drove me forward, urging me to uncover the truth before it swallowed me whole. I focused on the sounds around me. There had been whispers, soft and enticing, beckoning me deeper into the darkness. I had followed them earlier, driven by a foolish hope that I might find my friends, but instead, they had led me to a part of the ship I had never seen before. The crew quarters, darker and more unsettling than I could have imagined, came alive with the sounds of my footsteps pounding against the metal flooring. I approached a door, its wood splintered and grimy, with the word galley etched in faded letters. Somehow, I knew that whatever lay beyond held answers. Taking a deep breath, I turned the handle and pushed it open, the door creaking ominously. The galley was a charnel house, with overturned pots and pans strewn about as if a great struggle had taken place. The smell was overwhelming, an amalgamation of old food and something far more sinister. As I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the suffocating space. Panic clawed at my throat, but I forced myself to breathe through it. The faint hum of the ship's engines vibrated beneath my feet, grounding me in the reality of my situation. I had to find a way out of this mess. Then I heard it, a sound that froze the blood in my veins. A soft, slithering noise came from the far corner of the room. I turned slowly, slowly enough to stifle the instinct to bolt. A figure emerged from the shadows, hunched and trembling, with matted hair hanging over its eyes. It was a woman, or what remained of her. Her clothing hung in tatters, and her skin rippled with a sickly sheen. I could hardly breathe as she tilted her head, revealing a visage twisted by madness. "Help me," she rasped, her voice barely audible but heavy with desperation. I took a cautious step back, the instinct to flee warping into a paralyzing fear. They took them. They took everyone," she continued, her breath hitching as if she were fighting to stay coherent. "You have to listen." I stood rooted in place as she lurched toward me, arms outstretched, fingers clawing at the air. Her gaze pierced through my paralysis, the madness swirling in her eyes igniting an urgency within me. "The captain," she gasped. "He's not who you think he is. You have to leave, now." Before I could react, the galley door burst open, and a shadow leapt into the room. I barely had time to register the figure of a man, cloaked in darkness, before he lunged toward the woman, dragging her shrieking form back into the shadows. I bolted toward the exit, adrenaline surging as I pushed past the door frame. I heard her voice, frantically pleading, fading into the distance. I stumbled back into the corridor, heart racing, my mind a cacophony of thoughts. What had I just witnessed? The ship had become a nightmare, and I was trapped in its maw. I ran, the corridor stretching endlessly before me. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I fought against the rising dread that threatened to overtake me. I needed to reach the upper decks, to find an escape, but the ship had its own plans. As I rounded a corner, the lights flickered and went out, plunging me into a darkness that felt almost alive. I stumbled forward, hands outstretched, trying to find anything to steady myself. Then I heard it again, the whispering, curling around me like smoke. The voices were now a chorus, chanting a melody that sent chills racing down my spine. I could feel them pulling at me, urging me to listen, to succumb to the darkness. But I wasn't ready to give in. I pressed on, determined to find the answers I sought. My only choice now was to brave the shadows, to confront whatever lay in wait. The truth was out there, hidden within the ship's malevolence, and it was time I uncovered it, no matter the cost. The ocean roared beneath the hull of the SS Meridian, an ever-present reminder of the isolation we faced, like a dark, hungry beast waiting to swallow us whole. I had lost track of how many days we had been adrift. The crew, once a source of comfort, now moved like shadows, their eyes haunted, their laughter shriveled up like autumn leaves. Panic bloomed among the passengers, a delicate flower of despair that had begun to encroach upon my own heart. I had last seen Sarah just after sunset, the crimson glow of twilight illuminating her face as she leaned over the rail, staring into the abyss. I could still hear her voice, soft and uncertain, as she spoke of the stories she had heard, whispers of other ships lost to the darkness, cruising into oblivion. I thought of her then, alone on the upper decks, and felt a cold shiver trace my spine. The dining hall, once filled with clinking glasses and the aroma of gourmet meals, now stood empty, like a mausoleum. I found myself wandering its cold, cavernous space, the echoes of my footsteps punctuating the silence. The flickering LED lights above cast eerie shadows that danced along the walls, and for a moment, I caught a fleeting glimpse of someone or something slipping around the corner. My heart raced, and I dismissed it as my imagination, frayed and raw from the tension. I pushed open the door to the galley, my only source of warmth. The crew, a tight-knit group of professionals, had become unrecognizable, their camaraderie crumbling under the weight of dread. I spotted Marco, his face pale, staring blankly at pots simmering on the stove. I approached cautiously, hoping for a glimmer of reassurance. "What's going on, Marco?" I asked, my voice betraying an edge of fear. He turned slowly, his eyes glassy. "We're running out of supplies. The radio, it's dead. His words hung in the air, thick with hopelessness. I wanted to scream, to shake him out of his stupor, but I felt equally paralyzed. I retreated back into the hallway, the ship creaking and groaning as if it were alive, pregnant with despair. My mind raced with possibilities. Had we become a ghost ship, destined to drift forever on these infinite waters? Or it was Sarah. I needed to find her. With each door I pushed open, I felt more like an intruder in my own life. The cabins were empty, but I could hear whispers rising around me, as if the walls were alive with secrets. I glanced down a narrow staircase, leading to the lower decks, where the crew's quarters were located. The thought of descending into that dark space sent chills through me. But I had to find Sarah. A primal instinct overcame my fear. I descended the staircase slowly, the dim light flickering above me, casting long shadows. The air was thick and musty, filled with the scent of rust and salt. I called out her name, but my voice felt swallowed by the very walls. As I reached the bottom, I noticed a door ajar at the end of the corridor. I hesitated, apprehensive of the darkness that lay beyond. I approached and pushed it open. The room was in disarray, clothes strewn about, personal belongings scattered across the floor. But there was no sign of Sarah. Then I heard it, a soft sobbing, barely discernible, emanating from the corner. My heart leaped, and I rushed toward the sound, my breath quickening. I reached the furthest corner, and when I saw her, my heart sank. Sarah sat huddled against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, what happened? I knelt beside her, desperate to pull her into my embrace. But she recoiled, shaking her head violently. No! He's here. He's watching us. Her eyes darted around the room, filled with terror. Who? Who's watching? I asked, panic seeping into my voice. Her trembling intensified, and she pointed toward the small window, its glass smeared with salt and grime. I turned to look but saw nothing except the black, churning sea. Please, let's get out of here, I urged, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. As I helped her to her feet, I heard the faint sounds of footsteps above. We froze, straining to listen. The ship seemed to shift beneath us, and an ominous creak echoed through the air, a promise of something terrible lurking just beyond our grasp. We have to find the others, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. As we moved toward the door, another sound reached us, something heavy dragging across the deck, a muffled, rhythmic thud that sent chills cascading down my spine. Stay close, I whispered, gripping her hand tightly. We stepped into the hallway, shadows pooling in every corner. The world outside had become alien, twisted by our fears. I could feel eyes upon us, watching, waiting. We crept cautiously toward the staircase leading back up, our hearts pounding as we maneuvered through the dim corridor. Just then, a loud crash resonated from somewhere above, and the ceiling rattled ominously. We exchanged a terrified glance, and a primal instinct propelled us forward. But the moment we reached the upper deck, a pungent wind swept through my hair, and I froze in horror. The railing had been splintered, a gaping hole leading straight down into the churning sea. The sound of laughter, high and twisted, echoed around us, a cacophony that seemed to rise from nowhere and everywhere at once. Run! I shouted, pulling Sarah back, but she hesitated, her eyes darting to the edge. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, cloaked in darkness, its face obscured. It grinned, a sickly gleam in its eyes as it stepped closer. Welcome aboard, it hissed, the voice slithering like a serpent through the air. And in that moment, I realized the true horror of our plight. We were not just lost at sea. We were prey, stranded in a game that had only just begun. The ship creaked like an old man waking from a restless sleep, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of my cabin window, the vast black sea stretching infinitely before me, a canvas of darkness that swallowed every trace of light. My pulse quickened as I recalled the events of the previous nights, the whispers in the corridors, the flickering lights, and the unsettling sensation that I was being watched. I remembered how the passengers had begun to vanish. One by one, they disappeared without a trace. It started with small things, a missing shoe, an abandoned bag, a short scream drowned by the laughter of the waves. Then it escalated. I had overheard hushed conversations, frantic voices rising above the low hum of the ship's engines. The crew tried to maintain a facade of calm, but I saw it in their eyes. They were just as frightened as we were. I had settled into a half-hearted routine of avoiding the dining hall and keeping to the shadows, the flickering lights above my head reminding me of the unnatural occurrences that plagued the vessel. My heart raced as I recalled the image of Rebecca, my closest friend on board. She had been the last to go. One moment she was with me, her laughter filling the air, and the next, she was just gone. I glanced at the door. It was locked, but that hardly made me feel safe. I had taken to barricading it with my suitcase, a flimsy barrier against the unknown. I pulled the sheets tighter around me, the cool fabric offering little comfort. My eyes drifted to the clock, its hands moving slowly, mocking my anxiety. I had decided I would wait until dawn to venture out, but sleep came only in fits and starts, each creak of the ship sending me jolting awake. At some point, a heavy knock broke through the haze of my restless thoughts. I froze, adrenaline coursing through my veins. It was an unsteady, frantic rhythm, unlike anything I had heard before. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen, my heart hammering in time with the knocking. "Rebecca?" I whispered, convinced it was her voice calling me from beyond the door. I wanted it to be her, to feel her presence again, but deep down, I knew that was unlikely. I had to fight the urge to respond, to reach out. Instead, I stayed silent, pulse racing, hoping the sound would stop. After what felt like an eternity, it did. The ship sighed, and I allowed myself to breathe again, but the relief was short-lived. Moments later, I heard a soft shuffle outside my cabin, followed by a low, indistinct murmur. It was as if someone was speaking, but the words were drowned by the sea's roar. I couldn't stay cooped up any longer. The cabin felt like a tomb, and I needed to know what was happening. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaky beneath me as I moved to the door. I hesitated, hand hovering over the handle, but the urge to know overpowered my fear. I turned the knob slowly, the mechanism grinding against years of wear. The door opened with an unsettling creak, revealing the dimly lit hallway of the ship. A chill swept through me as I stepped outside, the air thick with an unsettling energy that sent shivers down my spine. I peered left and right, the corridor stretching into shadows that seemed to sway and shift. I remembered the layout of the ship. There was an emergency exit nearby, a potential escape route if things went awry. I turned toward the end of the corridor when I noticed something, an imprint on the carpet, dark and wet. I leaned closer, dread pooling in my stomach. It was a trail, leading from my cabin toward the dining area. My mind raced, the thought of following it both thrilling and terrifying. I had to know if it led to Rebecca. I stepped cautiously, my shoes silent on the plush carpet as I followed the trail. The farther I went, the more the darkness seemed to thicken around me. Shadows danced against the walls, and I could hear the sound of water slapping against the hull, a constant reminder of the world outside. As I approached the dining area, the whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls. They faded only to be replaced by the skittering sound of something moving just out of sight. I reached the entrance to the dining room, heart pounding in my chest. The door stood ajar, swaying slightly as if beckoning me to enter. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to turn back. But the thought of Rebecca, of what might have happened to her, pushed me forward. I stepped inside, the room empty and eerily quiet. Tables lay overturned, remnants of plates and glasses scattered across the floor like the aftermath of a disaster. My breath hitched as I caught a glimmer of something in the corner. I moved closer, eyes widening when I realized it was a shoe, Rebecca's shoe, unmistakably hers. A chill swept up my spine, and I felt the walls closing in around me. The whispers grew louder, swirling like a tempest in my mind. I stumbled back, glancing around the desolate room. Something shifted in the shadows, a figure creeping from behind one of the overturned tables. My heart dropped as I recognized the familiar shape. "Rebecca?" I croaked, barely able to articulate the hope that surged within me. The figure turned, but it was not her. It was a stranger, hollow-eyed and gaunt, a look of despair etched into their features. Their lips moved, and I strained to hear the words that were lost to the muffled chaos. "Help!" they gasped before collapsing forward, a lifeless body crumpling to the floor. Panic surged through me, and I turned to flee, but the whispers grew deafening, drowning out all rational thoughts. I raced back toward the corridor, the shadows closing in. The ship seemed to come alive around me, creaking and groaning as if it were a living creature determined to consume me. As I neared my cabin, the world around me blurred, and I knew I needed to hide. I sprinted inside, slamming the door and barricading it once more. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I sank to the floor, heart pounding, the cries of the ship echoing in my ears. I pressed my back against the door, hands trembling as I listened to the silence beyond. Whatever had taken Rebecca, it was drawing closer. I awoke to the sound of water slapping against the hull, a rhythmic reminder of the uncertainty surrounding me. The air in my cabin felt thicker somehow, clinging to my skin like an unwelcome blanket. I glanced at the clock on the wall, its face illuminated by the faint light of the early morning sun seeping through the porthole. It was just past 5, a time most would still consider the dead of night on a cruise ship. The memory of the previous day flooded back to me, the eerie whispers echoing through the corridors, the frantic search for my missing companions, and the deepening sense of dread that clutched at my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong aboard the SS Valerian. It was as though the ship itself was alive, its very structure pulsating with a malevolence I couldn't yet name. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet landing on the cold, polished floor. For a brief moment, I considered climbing back under the covers, burying myself in the fabricated safety of my cabin. But something compelled me to rise. I needed to know if anyone else had experienced the same unsettling events, the strange disappearances, the shadows darting at the edge of my vision, the whispers that beckoned in the darkness. The corridors were empty as I stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The overhead lights flickered intermittently, casting long, twisting shadows that danced along the walls. Each step I took echoed against the metal walls, the sound amplified in the quiet. I shivered, instinctively wrapping my arms around myself as I moved toward the common areas. My heart raced with anticipation, each beat resonating in my ears as I approached the main deck. As I reached the top of the stairs, the smell of salt water mixed with something unpleasant, a metallic tang that sent a jolt of unease through me. I paused, glancing back down the corridor, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the aft light. But there was only silence. I pressed on, pushing the heavy wooden door open with a creak that reverberated through the empty space. The deck was deserted, the chairs and tables arranged as if waiting for patrons who would never come. I stepped outside, letting the chilly breeze whip through my hair. The ocean stretched out endlessly, a dark, churning mass that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I felt small and insignificant against its vastness, and yet there was something about the horizon that tugged at me, a hint of color peeking through the clouds. It was then that I heard it, a distant sound, like laughter, tarried by the wind. It was a haunting melody, echoing through the emptiness, and I couldn't tell if it was real or a figment of my fraying sanity. I turned my head, scanning the area for any sign of life, but the ship felt like a ghost town. The laughter faded, replaced by a low, mournful howl that sent a shiver down my spine. I stepped closer to the edge of the deck, peering over the railing. The ocean waves surged below, dark and ominous, as if they were hiding a secret just beneath the surface. A chill crept into my bones as I caught sight of something glimmering in the water, a flash of silver that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice hoarse and uncertain. The only reply was the wind whistling through the rigging, a mournful sound that suggested I was truly alone. I turned back toward the interior of the ship, intending to search for other passengers. My instincts flared, every nerve in my body screamed to take action. The ship felt alive, and I could sense a presence lurking just beyond my reach. As I stepped back inside, I was met by the dim glow of the corridor. This time, however, I thought I saw movement, a shadow flitting past the edge of my vision. With a surge of adrenaline, I hurried after it, my footsteps quickening. The shadow led me deeper into the bowels of the ship, away from the sunlight and into the darkness that seemed to thrive in the staterooms and storage areas. Every instinct told me to turn back, but curiosity spurred me onward. I had to know what lay ahead. As I rounded a corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. The door to the crew quarters stood ajar, a sliver of darkness shining through the crack. I could hear muffled voices inside, hushed but urgent. My heart raced. I pressed myself against the wall and leaned closer, straining to listen. "Not safe here anymore," one voice whispered, shaking with suppressed fear. "We need to get the passengers off this ship." "Where's the captain?" another voice replied, sounding frantic. "He's the only one who can." The conversation faltered, and an uneasy silence settled over the space. My mind raced with questions. What had happened to the captain? Why was the crew so fearful? I stepped back, suddenly aware of the reality closing in around me. I shouldn't have come this far. Whatever horrors lurked behind that door, I didn't want to uncover them. But just as I turned to flee back to the safety of my cabin, I heard it again, the laughter, echoing in the distance, drawing me back toward the abyss. The unsettling thought gnawed at me. I wasn't alone. The ship was filled with nameless horrors, and they were hungry. The shadows lengthened, and with them, the feeling of despair wrapped tightly around my chest. I needed to escape, but the true terror of the SS Valerian was just beginning to reveal itself, and I feared I was trapped within its grasp.